Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I could get you to wrap up your conversations real quick. We're still welcoming some folks in at the back there, so we'll just go over some housekeeping once we can get it down to a dull roar here.
Right.
All right. Hey, Clarissa. Do we have a long line, or is it pretty much? Okay. I'm going to get started, folks. I know you guys, thank you all for being here tonight. We're here for the Molalla UGB Town Hall, so if you were looking for something else, you're in the wrong place. So at any rate, we're going to have a presentation about the UGB process and what it's looking like for this draft amendment. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions. But before we get there, I did want to touch on a couple of things. There are restrooms through these doors here, right basically just on the other side of this wall behind the clock. So if you need to use the restroom, there's a restroom out there. Obviously, if there's an emergency, we've got the exits over here, so you can use any of those. So tonight we're here to talk about Mollalla's urban growth boundary. And some of you may know, some of you may not, that OR 660 requires each city to have a 20-year land supply inside of its UGB. Molalla hasn't really looked at our UGB for the last about 40 years, so it's overdue. There is a site that the city has set up called the Molalla Current. It's current.cityofmolalla.com. We also have some flyers with that web address as well as a QR code. There's a page dedicated to the urban growth boundary process on that, on the Molalla Current there. So if you guys have questions or wanted to review documents or any of those sorts of things, they should be there for you. If what you're looking for is not there, you can shoot us a comment on that page and we'll find it for you. But anyways, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our team here and then get started on this presentation so we can get to your guys' questions, because I know you've got a lot. So my name is Matt Korthel. I'm the Assistant City Manager and lead the Planning and Community Development Divisions. Our Planning Manager is Dan Zinder. Our Engineering Section Manager is Sam Miller. Our Consultant, Violet Brown. And then our City Manager, Dan Huff, is setting up chairs. And our Associate Planner, Clarissa Davis, is at the back of the room helping people get set up. So that's the team here is going to be answering your questions, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Zinder to read a statement to you guys, some information that he's going to provide, and then we'll dive into a presentation, and then we'll get into the Q&A portion that I think you're all looking forward to. So thank you for being here again, and I'll pass it off to Mr. Zinder.
All right, thank you all again for taking time out of your schedule to come to Mollalla's Town Hall discussion of the urban growth boundary expansion proposal. It's really exciting to see such a crowded house, so many people passionate about the future of Molalla and its surrounding areas and what that looks like. So we're nearing the end of what has now been nearly a 6-year process. The fruits of that are a draft proposal that we have in front of us that includes thousands of hours of conversations, sometimes fraught, mostly productive, always interesting, always deep between our staff, 3J Consulting, our community partners, citizen bodies, community input, partnering agencies, and the city's elected and appointed officials. It's been a delicate balancing act, and the results are something that I think are really going to help Molalla move forward and meet the needs of current and future citizens. So there's been a lot of discussion going on regarding why Molalla is going through a UGB expansion now, and so before heading into the details, which our consultant Violet Brown with 3J Consultant will bring to you, I wanted to tell sort of the beginning of that story because I've been here for the entirety of it. So part of the answer, as Mr. Korthel mentioned, is that we legally have to. So cities, House Bill 2001 that was passed in 2019 required that cities over 10,000, which Molalla became shortly after that time, have to complete a housing need analysis and buildable lands inventory to see what their 20-year housing supply requirement would be. And if they have a deficit, they need to expand the urban growth boundary to meet that deficit. And that's sort of where our story started in 2021 when the city began work on our own housing needs analysis. Beyond that requirement, what the housing needs analysis showed, and something that was clear to anyone who sort of works in development in Molalla, is that Molalla is nearly out of residential land, vacant residential land, particularly residential land that's zoned for lower density development. And it's contributing to affordability crisis for housing in the city. You know, all of a sudden housing prices here are not that much less than they are in the Portland metro area. And the gap between what residents here can afford and what housing is available has become further and further apart. And supply is a big piece of that gap. So since the report was finished, the city completed subdivision applications for the remaining 2 tracts of easily accessible low density land. The first of which is now completely built out. So only more difficult parcels remain, like that you'll have to combine a couple parcels and make an access to the back and put a road in, or something that's not directly off the road. So they're a little more challenging to build for development. So once the housing analysis is completed, state law requires cities to take actions called efficiency measures to increase housing supply within the existing boundary, and then do studies on where to expand to meet the remaining needs. Most of that's usually done through rezoning. So after that, you rezone some of the lands. Now, Molalla had a problem in this regard, in that the city has a large amount of underutilized industrial land in the existing boundary, but we hadn't done an economic opportunities analysis in over 20 years and didn't have a basis to rezone those lands. So we didn't want to expand more than we needed to, and we honestly wanted to activate those lands. So we had, after a long series of discussions with Department of Land Conservation and Development, we entered into a little used process that's sort of generally talked about as the sequential urban growth boundary that allowed us to do that economic opportunities analysis as well. And as a result of that, we did find, as we expected, that a lot of those smaller industrial parcels were unlikely to be used within the next 20 years, and we were able to rezone 44 acres within the city to account for most of our higher density land. So that's happening within the urban growth boundary. And with these 2 analyses, the city was also able to work from a vantage point of knowing 20-year land needs for employment and residential land. So you'll see some of that is accounted for in the proposed expansion you see before it. So I wanted to provide sort of the beginning of that context. I'm going to turn it over now to Violet Brown of 3J Consulting, and she's going to tell you sort of where we're going and what we've landed on. So thank you all so much, and Violet, take it away.
Awesome. First, Dan, you put me in charge of the laptop, and I can't change the PowerPoint.
You can't change
I
that.
can't advance, so if you could help me with that. Yeah, a quick introduction. I'm Violet Brown, as they mentioned. You may have seen me before. I'm with 3J Consulting, and I'm an urban planner, and my clients are cities who are going through similar situations all across Oregon. And this is technically my 3rd meeting here in Molalla. The first one I did back in the fall of 2024 was on your housing production strategy. And then we had 1 meeting last year, spring of 2025, on the urban growth boundary. Now, if you were here, I think probably many of you were here last time. You'll see a little bit of repeat information, because my goal is to give a presentation that tells you everything you need to know, even if this is your first meeting. Okay, so if you were here last year, you're going to get a little bit of a review and refresher. Some of the numbers are updated because we've gotten some direction from the state over some assumptions we need to make about densities, and I'll go into that later. So you'll get the updated numbers, and also then this time we're going all the way forward to an actual proposed new urban growth boundary.
It just straight up froze.
It straight up froze.
So while we wait for that computer to reboot, I'm sure some of you in the back cannot see this screen. And we will make this PowerPoint available on that Molalla Current website. So if you wanted to see particular numbers, I know it's not ideal, but that's the best we can do. So we'll make this PowerPoint available on that website, the Molalla Current. And again, there's flyers back there with the web address or a QR code, whichever you prefer, so that you can see these numbers a little closer when you.
Yeah, and
Thank
you, Mac. So yes, Mac mentioned there's some handouts in the front. There's a sign-in sheet. Honestly, really the sign-in sheet is the state wants to look at how well I've done my job in terms of, did people come? Were we able to give information to community members who were interested in participating? Speaking of that, I'll piggyback on something that Max said. And Dan, thank you guys so much for showing up. I can't do my job without community members showing up to participate, braving the heat, coming to listen to something that is really very important to your community. So I really commend you for your commitment. Okay, there we go. All right, so a little bit about what we're gonna do. Again, as Mac mentioned in the front, there are handouts. I said to some of you that were here, but now it's my chance to tell everybody. Everything that was a handout at the front is going to be available on Molalla Current, including the comment card. If you're more comfortable filling out a handwritten comment card and turning it in to me tonight, I promise to read it, to log it. It'll become part of our feedback from the community. If you're more comfortable online, there is a QR code that'll be that's on the comment card, and the link will be on Molalla Current. You can fill out that comment card online. It's got all the same maps, all the same questions. And again, the PDF, the slides of this presentation will be available online for any of your neighbors who weren't able to come in person, or if you want to go back and look at it. We really want to set this up so for everybody here in person gets to get a full presentation with all the information you need to have a really fruitful discussion at the end of this and to ask your questions. And then anybody who couldn't show up or couldn't be here can also have a similar experience going through the same information and providing us with some feedback. So we'll go through a bit of the project overview. We'll go through the UGB process. What does the state of Oregon require for this? And then how does that actually apply here in Molalla? And where did that end up for us as a project team? So again, Dan mentioned this project's been going on for a while. It started long before I've been here. But again, this is something that I updated today since I've been coming out and talking to you guys about growth in your community for years now. So technically, again, this is our third meeting. But again, if you haven't attended one of these, that's fine. You'll get all the information that you need today. You're not behind. I put this up front because I want you guys to know going into this, this is not the last chance for public comment, and I want you to get a sense of where this goes next before we even dive into any of the particulars about UGB. So tonight we're having our public meeting. The next step is for us to take the feedback we hear from you, refine our proposal that we're sending to Planning Commission, and then the whole thing goes through a hearing with Planning Commission. That is full of public comment. For those of you who've done that in the past, you can put in written comment, you can do your 3 minutes up at the microphone and give your spoken comment at the hearing. Again, there's still an opportunity for public comment at that point. This is an opportunity to sort of ask more informal questions, to have a discussion, for us to hear information from you so that we can refine what we're proposing before it becomes a formal hearing, right? So then it goes through Planning Commission. Same process with City Council. There'll be another meeting, a public hearing would be available. Council will hear it. They may have additions or comments or concerns or stuff that they want tweaked or changed with the proposal before they adopt it. It then goes to the county, and that has a county hearing with the County Board of Commissioners, and then it goes through also public comment at that as well. So there's still lots of steps for this. As Dan said, we are entering the final part for those of us who've been working on this for 3 years, 6 years, but also, you know, again, this isn't the last moment to have your point taken into consideration. All right, so what is a UGB? It's something unique to Oregon. It's one of the reasons I decided to become a planner in Oregon and not my home state of Louisiana. So what it does is it kind of draws a circle around the city, cities of a certain size, and says, okay, we're going to try to maintain our growth inside this boundary, and we're going to do that in order to preserve our farmland. We don't want to become one of those states where you just have sprawl, you drive down the highway and you don't know when you're leaving one place and entering the next, and you don't have access to farms in your area. So this is a way to protect farmland, forest, and open space by motivating private developers to look inside areas that are already urbanized before they start to develop farmland. And in order to do that, what we do is we say, okay, what the space that you have has to be enough to accommodate what we're predicting as the next 20 years of growth. Okay, so what happens is, and again, we're doing that to look for housing, jobs, parks, recreational needs. And again, this is also not just sprawl because we don't like how it looks or we don't like how it feels, or we want to, be able to go to farm stands in 20 minutes outside of the city or whatever it is. It's also extremely efficient. Sprawl is very expensive. Having cities just expand and put in public works and water and sewer and all that stuff in a way that isn't really efficient and making sense is very costly. So that's another benefit of this. One of the things I also want to say at the very beginning is UGB is not city limits. That is completely different. UGB just says this is where growth can happen. If a property owner becomes part of the UGB but they don't want to be annexed into the city, that is a decision the property owner can make. Annexation happens much later, and that is not the process that we're doing right now. And if you're curious, property tax changes go with annexation. So if you're not interested in developing your land and your land is now going to be part of the UGB, it doesn't have to necessarily change anything if your plans are not changing to just use it the way that you've been using it. Okay, that I just want to get those differentials out of the way at the beginning. So what triggered, we go back. So what triggers a UGB expansion? As Dan mentioned, when a city every city in Oregon over 10,000 people in population is required to do a housing needs analysis. They now call them HCAs instead of H&As, housing capacity analysis, but that's irrelevant to you because yours is under the old, we're grandfathered in under the old rules because we've been doing this process for a while. So you have an H&A. I believe it was your first H&A, right? Because you hit 10,000 people and that triggered the requirement to do an H&A, and so you did, okay? That H&A looks at, again, it looks at 20 years of growth. How much housing and how many new units are you gonna need in order to accommodate and house the amount of growth that they're expecting for your city? The state mandates that you use Portland State's population projections. They want everybody using the same methodology. So Portland State Population Research Center every year updates its population projections, and that's what you're required to use. These H&As or HCAs, once you hit 10,000 people, you have to have one. After that, you update it every 8 years. It's on an 8-year cycle. Okay, so every 8 years you have to look at it and say, how are we doing on our housing production? How are we doing on that growth? And you can course correct if the projection was too high or too low, and you realize, hey, I'm 8 years into this, from the last one, we actually are growing a lot faster or a lot slower. You can pivot and then say, okay, well now we have enough land or we don't. But every 8 years is when you do that cycle. If there is a shortfall of housing land, you are required by law to expand. Okay, again, as Dan mentioned, supply and demand. If demand is going up and there's not enough supply, it creates a very, expensive, difficult housing market for local people. And so we want to make sure that there's enough land for people to build things for people in Molalla, right? So again, Dan mentioned already, and so some of my slides are going to be a little bit redundant. I'll try to skip over that part. But again, cities are also required to do a projection of their job growth. They look at commercial, retail, all different kind of industries, and predict whether or not they have enough jobs land. I will say you're not required to expand just for jobs. You are required to expand for housing. The jobs is optional. So, but we did do an EOA and an H&A. It says the population, you guys hit that 10,000, and now it says population is going to grow by another 5,000 between now and 2043. So what does that mean? The H&A that was adopted by the city now becomes part of your record, your comprehensive plan. It's binding on the city. Says that you're going to need about 1996, about 2,000 new units between now and 2043. Again, not all of those are just going to pop up. Again, it's just you want enough land to fit 2,000 units between now and 2043. If you've been following the process, you may have remembered that City Council voted this spring because Portland State's population projections, they come out every year. Honestly, this happens in most of our projects. The projection went down. It's not as high as it was when we started this process. That is something that we deal with because census numbers come out every year, population projections come out every year, but our work sometimes takes a year, 2 years, 3 years. So by the time you get to adoption, maybe you've got different numbers. City Council listened to public comment on it. I think there were 2 sessions devoted to it, where some of the time was devoted to that issue, and ultimately decided to go forward with the projections that are on the record now, because basically what was stated was taxpayer dollars had been spent doing this project for 2 years and starting all over with no guarantee that 2 years later the numbers might not just bump right back up, and now we've spent double taxpayer dollars on staff time and my time and all this process. So they decided to go forward with what was already adopted. So what do we do? As Dan mentioned, you've got on the record in the report that you have a shortfall, right? You need some more land. First thing you have to do is look at the land you already have and say, are we using it efficiently enough? Molalla did that and was able to actually cut their housing need in half by rezoning that unused industrial land into residential land inside the UGB. So it cut the almost 2,000 to a little over 1,000 new units. The state requires, and if you read the report last year, the numbers were a little bit different because we were told we could do it based on average densities. When I go to turn those housing units into how many acres does that actually mean, I have to make some assumptions about how dense is that development going to be. And the report that has been on the website since last spring of 2025 did say you needed about 227 or 228 acres. We were doing that based on average densities across like low density R1, R2, R3, your high density that can go up to 20 units an acre. We were told last week by the state that we have to use this safe harbor provision of 7 units an acre. So those numbers have changed a little bit. That's the only thing that's changed from last year to now. And now we're looking at about a little less than 200 acres of land that we need to bring into the urban growth boundary. I was also told by the state that that's sort of a Price is Right situation. You want to go up to but not over whatever you need. So we're looking at, because when you actually start bringing in parcels, you're not going to hit 0.45 acres exactly on the nose. So we're looking to bring in land that goes up to that amount. In addition, when we're doing this, I mentioned that job land is optional. One of the findings of the EOA was that there were industries that might be interested in bringing jobs to Molalla that need large lot industrial sites, and that there is a shortfall of large lot industrial, namely things over 20 acres. And so in the expansion, if we could find 2 lots like that, the EOA supports us bringing those into the UGB to bring for future job growth. And this is just pulling a table from that EOA report that was adopted, I think, February of 2025, and is still available on Molalla Current. So then the first step is, once you've shown that you're using everything efficiently and there's nothing else you can tweak inside your UGB and you still actually do need more land, you've brought that need down as low as you can, you draw a 1 mile radius around the city limits, or the existing UGB, sorry. There's some places where you have to do 1.5 miles, but that's a little technical. You draw a big boundary and you have to study that land. At the end of the day, your study area that you are analyzing and kind of pros and cons of going here, going there, you have to have twice the need that you need. You need 200 acres, you have to study at least 400 acres to show that you're actually looking at what the different alternatives are and you really are considering different land. So we did that, right? Back in 2024, we did that. 2025, we drew the boundary around the existing UGB. The next step is, okay, we've got all this land. Is there anything we can exclude right off the top that we're not going to use? And there are some very strict rules over that. Anything that is called impracticable. That's an annoying lawyer term. I'm a retired lawyer, so I get to say that. But they, what does that mean exactly? We've been talking to the state over this whole process and said, what does impracticable mean? And I've been told, well, if you got to build a bridge over the Molalla River, that's too expensive. If you have other land, then you go elsewhere, and you consider anything that far away impracticable. Okay, so if we can show that providing public facilities and services to any of the land is just not practical, then we can exclude it. Anything that's subject to significant development hazards, floodplains, huge slopes, stuff like that. You go through, and that's our first thing. It's just, does any of this land just doesn't even make any sense for development? If it consists of significant scenic, natural, cultural, or recreational resources, if you've got historic sites, you've got scenic areas, you're not going to consider that for housing development, right? You're going to exclude that from your study area right off the bat. Any land owned by the federal government and managed for rural uses, that gets taken off the table at the very beginning. And what you're left with after you exclude all of that land has to be at least twice of what you need so that you can show that you're actually really considering alternatives. All right, preliminary study area are exclusions. So these are, Molalla has something called rural reserves. This is land set aside for rural uses, so that comes out immediately. All right, you can see they're not really, well, hopefully you can see. Those in the back, maybe not. If you can see there, this green swath up at the top, most of it's not even contiguous with the existing UGB, so it wouldn't really make sense anyway as an expansion, but we had to take that out from our consideration. You take out major rivers and slopes, again, anything that doesn't make sense for development, so we mapped all of that and took that land out. Historic landmarks. We looked at anything registered as historic. Again, all these data sources come from the state, federal government, other organizations that collect data for these sort of things, right? So then once you're left with what you're actually going to consider, you've excluded everything that doesn't make any sense, then you have something called parcel prioritization. And this goes back to the whole reason we have UGBs in the first place, which is our first priority, the land we're going to go to first, is anything that's already being used for housing and is already sort of urbanized land, okay? So that's something called urban reserves. Molalla doesn't have any urban reserves, so that doesn't help us. Or something called exception land, and this has become very relevant for Molalla. So across the south of the UGB in the county land, there are 580 acres of what's called exception land. That is land that has been granted an exception to the exclusive farm use. So it's been taken out by the county, it's been granted this exception that they don't have to use it for exclusive farm use. Upon a finding that it's already been sort of developed in an urban way. It's more like a neighborhood. It's not as much like farmland. And if you've given that exception and you've said, no, you're not required to farm your land because it's developed in a more urban way, then that's your first recourse. That's the land you go to first to expand. That's your first recourse. Your very last recourse down here at priority 4 is your high value prime soil land for farming. Okay, so again, they kind of prioritize and say, if something's already urbanized, then grab it first. Then you go to marginal lands, which Molalla doesn't have any. Then you go to third priority, which is farmland that is not considered high value. There's something about it, whether it's the soils or there's some maybe some slopes or some other things that make it not great for farming. That comes in. And then at the very last, if you still had land need left, if you still had acreage you need to bring in, then you're allowed to go to high value farmland. So that's that hierarchy there. But for us, you may have noticed, if you're math experts in the room, 580 acres of exception land to the south. How many acres did I say we needed? 198, right? So pretty much we ended our project last spring saying, we're probably pretty sure we're going to have to go to this exception land. We had a big meeting like this in the public. There's a lot of discussion about, but isn't it really expensive to go south? That doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel right to some of the community members. Shouldn't development really go north? That feels more intuitive to us as a community. That feels where the community is growing. That feels like the right direction. So we put a pause on the project. Staff went and got grant money to do a study to find out what this would actually cost, and to do a study all in every direction to say what would it cost to put in water, sewer, transportation, all of that. And so we came back, and this is the second phase of the project where we're trying to base our decision on actual numbers and say what is the cost of this expansion. All right, so you can see here that county zoning. If I show you what is considered agricultural forest, what's considered exclusive farm use, timberland, and then you've got this kind of gray blank space across the bottom. That's all that land that's been given that exception land because it is pretty urbanized and has more of a neighborhood size development or scale development. So we've made that first priority land is orange. You can see a little bit of the gold down at the bottom. That's really because Kaiser Creek down there makes that land third priority instead of fourth because it's not great for farming because of some of the slopes and some of the other stuff coming in on that land. And then again, of course, the constraints, the actual wetlands and the actual other kind of constraints that make land not really great for development. So again, we had a public meeting. I gave out the same FAQ last year, a similar comment form, but the one this year is updated with our new maps. We put it on the web. We got about 41 responses online to the questionnaire. We had a similar standing room only, over 100 people present at the meeting, and I think we went about 20 minutes over time doing Q&A, and I thought it was a really productive meeting, and that's what made us sort of put a pause and go and actually get the numbers on what things would cost. So okay, how do we do this? So we've got this first priority land. We know it's where we have to go first. We've got 580 acres of it, but we only need 198. How do we decide? How do we pick? The state requires under Goal 14, and I know some of you in the room over the last 2 years have become real experts on this. I've been extremely impressed. Your communities have been really active and involved in this, and I've had some really good discussions about this. These are called the location factors. Honestly, this is the feedback from you guys that is most helpful for me in trying to do my job, because if you can tell me something about this land that speaks to one of these location factors, that points out something that says, hey, this area is better than this because of one of these factors, that is something that we can take into consideration because that's the decision we're trying to make before us. Unfortunately, or fortunately or whatever, the results of the cost estimates came out that it's pretty comparable in terms of cost of public facilities no matter which direction that the expansion goes. That means that if we go back to that slide earlier about something being prohibitively expensive, we found that it isn't. So there's no land in your exception land that we can exclude right off the bat at the beginning as being impracticable for development because the costs are pretty much right in the same area. So now we're left with these location factors. Looking at the exception land, first one is it's got to make a certain amount of sense in terms of proximity, right? You're not going to jump a bunch of land and go grab something over here. You want to look at something that's touching the existing UGB. You look at parcel size. If something's really parcelized, a bunch of small parcels with a bunch of different property owners, that's not as likely to develop into housing. You know, that's harder for a developer to come in and negotiate with a bunch of property owners in order to build a subdivision or to build housing, right? So if it's really parcelized, if it doesn't have a lot of buildable land, like if you've got a 40-acre parcel, but 20 of it is constrained with wetlands, then that's not really efficient. Why are you bringing in 40 acres to only have actually half of that to be developed? So you look at this efficient accommodation of need. That's location factor 1, right? Is it efficient? 2, orderly economic provisions of public facilities. Again, this is that cost estimate we looked at. Water, sewer, transportation, stormwater. How expensive is it to serve these areas? I think because of some of the slopes and the change in elevation across the exception land, there was some discussion of like pump stations and other stuff that people think. And when we actually hired the engineers and came out, and I think the engineers did a great job. They're very well aware of Molalla and have worked with Molalla in the past. They're very familiar. They did a really detailed report. It's on the website. It's been on the website for a week or 2 weeks, I think. And if you want to dig into the numbers that you can, and again, they just found that some of that was not, some of the assumptions we were making just looking at the land and thinking about it didn't actually result in a higher cost, or what weren't actually needed when they looked at the size of the pipe and what road it could go down and all the stuff that would be needed to serve those areas. But when we're picking two places, you're obviously going to want to pick one that makes the most sense in terms of that cost. The third is the ESEE, environmental, economic, social, and energy. This is where I look at things, again, like parcel size and development pattern, social, like how close is it to other community assets, libraries, schools, fire, like things like that, the grocery stores, how close is it to the community? So if you're picking between two places, you're going to prioritize the one that makes the most sense in terms of if somebody's living here, where are they going to shop? Where are they going to go to school? Are they going to have access? Does it make sense that way? Environmental, again, if there's hazards, floodplain, slopes, or Goal 5 resources, Goal 5 in the state of Oregon or your wetlands, you're going to look at that. And again, you're going to compare that factor between when you're looking at this parcel versus that parcel. You're going to say which one makes the most sense to bring in that we think it's actually going to develop into some affordable housing or something that people, starter homes or homes that really are going to be something that Molalla needs in the future and that people who live in Molalla can afford to build and or purchase. So also energy, we do look at travel, I did do this process for the city of Canby as well, and we were kind of looking at some alternatives. You look at the highways, you look at, okay, where are people going to commute to if we're going this way, if we take this chunk versus that chunk, what does it mean for commuting patterns and other things like that. And the last is compatibility with crops and forest land. That came up a lot in Canby because you had a lot of active farms right outside. If people are going to be taking, big tractors, I do say a lot, I'm from Louisiana, I grew up in a very small town. I have been stuck behind a sugarcane truck so many times and late for school. I really called, on these projects, sometimes I talk to farmers, I talk to landowners, and it's like, how do you use your land? What do your neighbors do? What are you growing? Is it something that's super, you need to keep super contained? Is it something that is really not compatible with having a residential neighborhood across the street? What would that mean to you as a farmer? So these conversations are really important, and we are able to use that information in making our decisions. Okay, so hearing that information is helpful. Here's a picture of what was your existing zoning. You can see that big purple chunks at the bottom were that industrial land. And you can see here that this chunk is what was rezoned yellow into residential. Again, it was underdeveloped. It wasn't being used for industrial, probably because it just wasn't very suited for industrial. So none of the industrial users wanted it. So it got changed to residential, and that brought the need down by like almost half. So again, that impracticable, I guess this is where I planned to talk about that, but I already did. Again, that was what we were kind of saying, like, our instincts that it's really prohibitively expensive, like 4 times as expensive to go south as it would be to go, say, north. Is that true? Can we prove it? If we can prove it with the numbers, with civil engineering numbers that says it's 4 times the cost, then we have a legal basis to go in a different direction and to say that exception land is impracticable. It's prohibitively expensive, and we're going to cut it out at the very beginning of the process and exclude it from our study area. And that did not happen. Again, it came out pretty much comparable. So what we do is, in order to study these and these location factors, we divide everything up into little sub-areas so that we can talk about them in a manageable way, right? You can't talk about it parcel by parcel when you're looking at hundreds and hundreds of acres, so you draw little sub-areas. These are different. If last year you were in sub-area 6, you might be in a different sub-area this year. When we met with the engineers and they actually knew what they were talking about in terms of engineering and how to do cost estimates, which I don't do, they looked and said, actually it makes sense to think of this as a sub-area because they would all be served by the same pipe. I said, well, I didn't know that. Okay, so that's your new sub-area. So we worked with the city and the engineers to kind of divide them in a way that made sense for the engineering report. These sub-areas are the same ones And there's a map in the back of the room with this map on top of an aerial photograph, which I find personally very helpful in locating where I live, or understanding what things are. So if you want to take a moment in the back of the room, this is there. So these are the numbers. Somebody asked this question, and it was a very good question. These are the sub areas that are used in the report. That's online with the cost estimate. So if you look at sub area 4 or sub area 5 on this map, that is what they used in those cost estimates in the report. They haven't changed since then. We just had to change them in order to do the cost estimates. All right, so these are those sub areas. This is that map that's in the back of the room where I've got the same sub areas drawn on top of an aerial map. And this is the proposed new residential space. In yellow, this would be the parcels that we landed on when we applied all of those cost estimates, and we applied the location factors. We looked at where would the new pipe for water, where would the new sewer line go, how can we be as efficient as possible. And so when I'm looking at this, I'll tell you a couple things about the cost estimates. First caveat I want to say about the cost estimates, and I think you guys will all hopefully this makes sense, and I explain it in a way that makes sense. If we go back to the sub area, 8 and 9, a lot of 8 and 9 is included in what we want to bring in. That is on both sides of own away, okay? I don't know, I still haven't been told if it's ONA or ONA, but anyway, I'm going to say own away. So both sides of own away. If you ask me how much does it cost to service sub area 8, I have to include the whole, say, $5 million of whatever expense it costs to go down own away. If you ask me what it costs to service sub area 9, I have to give you the whole price tag for what it costs to go down own away. Because what if I only need 40 acres and I'm only going to take 9? I got to spend that $5 million to service 9, right? Or if I'm only taking 8, I got to spend that $5 million to service 8. When we actually do it in reality, if you spend $5 million and you need 200 acres and you're taking most of both, that cost gets spread across both of those sub areas, and it brings that cost of that area down. Okay? We're not going to pay for it twice, but if you ask me to put a price tag on it, I have to give the price for everything that needs to happen in order for services to be in 8 at all. Right? So again, we tried to say if services are going to come down own away, and they're going to come down Molalla Avenue or be extended further down Molalla Avenue over here in between 3 and 5 and in between, say, 4 and 6. Again, that extension has a price tag. If you bring in stuff a little on each side, that price gets distributed across those sub areas. Okay? Because the report will tell you for each sub area what is the cost per housing unit that the sub area can accommodate. And again, that price per unit is going to go down when you're actually looking at the whole thing you're bringing in, when you bring in all 200 acres. Okay? So this is what we're looking to bring in, and I'll show you why. This is sub area 1, zoomed in. This will be in your report. You'll see there were similar maps like this in the report that was issued last May of 2025. The blue you're seeing are wetlands. On the side, you'll see that we have considered road classifications, right? What roads are coming in? Are the roads a collector road? Are they an arterial road? This is also wetlands, the second map on the side that's got that really ugly peachy color and the blue hash marks. The peachy color is something called hydric soils. I had to learn about this on this project. A very lovely lady at the county explained it to me. Hydric soils are not actually wetlands. But given that you haven't done a local wetland inventory in a long time, which is something that will happen after this process, hydric soils are often indicative that when you do an actual inventory, they may find a wetland. They may find a significant wetland there. So it isn't that it's a wetland that I can just take out and say, oh, it's not developable, or it's going to be developable only at a certain, with only mitigation, but it is indicative that there might be something there that'll get found when you actually try to bring it in and inventory that land. So I want to show that as well. And then the bottom in the corner with the yellow and the green, that's your zoning, right? So that shows that it's zoned residential with the county existing. This is sub-area 1. It's Ivor Davies Park. It's coming in. It has 0 housing capacity because it's coming in as a park. Okay? That's been the city's plan all along. But that just shows you.
Can we go back to that for a hot
Yeah,
second?
go ahead.
Just notably about the sub-area 1 is that the only the park portion of sub-area 1's coming in, not
Yes.
that other part.
Good point. I had a lovely intern with really good intentions, and he drew that sub-area boundary all around it, but actually you can see there's a parcel up in that corner that is not the park. That parcel is not coming in the future maps you'll see it's blank. It's not, so the sub-area is not square, it's got a curve out, okay? This is sub-area 3, and you can see those wetlands, right? City would like to get those wetlands inventory. They connect right on to Ivor Davies Park. So the plan is, if we go back, I'll wait till you take your picture. Okay. If I go back to this, you can see that 1 and 3 are really coming in as park and open space. Okay. 3, this is 5. This is sub-area 5. You can see it's not super parcelized when we were talking about that. It's touching Molalla Forest Road, so it's touching the existing UGB. It's on, and we're mainly looking here to bring in those parcels that are touching Molalla Ave, because that's the place where it makes sense to extend services. Because you can see, when you get a chance to look at the report up close, or you look at this slide on the website tomorrow, you'll see the legend shows you water mains, storm mains, sewer mains, and so you can kind of see right behind where they stop on Molalla Ave. So that's what we would be extending down Molalla Ave in the price estimates there. So what we're really looking at are the ones here on that touch Molalla Ave, and you can see there's a little kind of dogleg road. My map says it's South Rachel Larkin Road. We wouldn't be taking anything from 5 that's on the other side of that road. It would just be the stuff that's closest to Molalla Avenue. This is sub-area 7, and you'll notice I'm skipping around because if we go back to the full sub-area maps, 2, 4, and 6 are not touching the existing UGB, and they came out as more expensive, mainly because there are a lot of small lot homes there existing, and it came out as a lot more expensive. So instead of going down Molalla Avenue and taking everything that way, we decided to go down Molalla Avenue a little bit and down Ona Way a little bit, and take land that makes a little more sense in terms of type of development that we're looking for. So I'm not doing any zoom in of those because they've been sort of excluded. But this is 7, and there are some parts of this close to 8 that are being considered part of our new boundary. But for the most part, a lot of 7, some of these parcels are landlocked. There's not a lot of roads that go back in there. Some of them don't have access roads. And again, as you get further into that middle, away from Molalla Avenue and away from Ona Way, it gets more and more expensive to bring services into there, right? So we're gonna have to build roads to then bring those services away, as opposed to just taking stuff on both sides of those roads. So most of 7 is not coming in. And then, like I said, 8, you can see that these are really kind of larger parcels that go right down Ona Way. And all sort of have access there, right where the public facilities would be extended. And then 9 is sort of similar, right? So we really only went as far down Ona Way as we needed in order to hit that magic number on the number of acres we're looking to bring in. And once we hit the number of acres we want to bring in, we stopped, right? We're really trying to bring in as little as possible, but still actually give you some housing space and take that pressure off of the housing market inside of the existing UGB. Okay? So this is that socials map, that community location. We did a little bit about like where would they grocery shop? Would they have access to this? You know, you can see there's sort of that bus stops. You can see the library. You know, we tried to put all the schools. Again, extending down Molalla Avenue and Ona Way is really where we landed on what made the most sense, what was the most efficient use, what was the most connected to the existing community, And then the last piece, that location factor 4, is the crops. Would we be in any way incompatible with existing crops? Are we going to really make it difficult for local farmers? I can tell you, I cut off the legend because it's really not that useful. That pinky red color is Christmas tree farms. I know this from coming out last year and telling you this. Everybody said that is not a Christmas tree farm. I have looked into it. Apparently, anybody who said at any point in the last, say, 20 years told the USDA that they were going to build Christmas trees, the USDA database still has them listed as a Christmas tree farm. Even if those are all Christmas tree farms, 5, 8, and 9, 3, we're not impinging on any sort of active crops. Okay. Again, red is Christmas tree farms. The orange is considered other trees or other fruit trees. And again, that location factor didn't really help us pick between spaces because none of the spaces we were looking at really had any data on that. This is a thing. If this is outdated data, but it's the best I got. If you have information that says, hey, no, this is actually an active farm and something's growing here and it's really incompatible with having a subdivision across the street, tell me. I can modify this data based on accounts from the community. Our engagement can inform this information. Otherwise, I'm just going on what I can download from the USDA as their official thing. That's what I mean when I say, if you have information that says, hey, no, this is, your parcel map is wrong, or you're not thinking about the community location correctly, or commuting patterns correctly, or I have information about wetlands, or that this is not really developable. All those location factors I went through, if you have real knowledge, local knowledge, then I want to talk to you, right? We have about a week now that comment is going to be up on the website, that comment form. So if you don't fill it out tonight and you talk to your neighbor and you find out that there's something you weren't aware of that you think sways this decision one way or the other, have them fill out the comment card. I'll leave it up for a week to get those comments. I'll download all the comments. I'll read through all of them, and then I'll report to the city, hey, did we hear anything that makes us change our boundary? Do we need to change this? Do we have any information we need to put into our analysis that gets us to a different result? So again, this is a little bit for the policy wonks in the room or any other retired attorneys. This is that process, right? We got all the way through the orange line last year. This summer, we're reevaluating the sub areas with our detailed engineering cost estimates. We did that in June. That report's been up on the website. Right now, again, we're at that UGB amendment adoption process. This is our chance to have an informal sort of conversation, dialogue around it, ask questions, talk about it, make any tweaks we need to make before we make a recommendation for a formal hearing for adoption. Okay? And then again, it goes through that with the city. That'll be August and September. And it goes through it with the county, October through December. It then goes, for those of you interested, it then goes to DLCD, Department of Land, Conservation and Development, for approval or denial. The approval or denial is something that is appealable to court. And technically that decision can go up to the Oregon Court of Appeals. All right, again, these are those dates that I showed you at the beginning, because I know if some of you are just finding out about the process now, it can be a lot to take in, and you can feel like, wow, I'm at the end, this is already decided. Again, we have some time to have that conversation, and then again, even if we have the conversation, there aren't any feedback changes, we don't end up with any changes that make you feel like it really is something that, or you support it or you don't support it or whatever, you have something to say about it. Again, at Planning Commission, City Council, and at the county, those are all public hearings. That's what's required by law. Honestly, this meeting is something that we just want to do because we want to make sure that we're hearing from the community while we still have a chance to update what we're recommending. Okay? Any questions? I'll give you some parameters here, although ask whatever you want, but some ideas. If there was information in the presentation that was not clear and you want me to explain more or you have something to say about it, that's something that would be worth worth everybody, because maybe if you have the question, somebody else probably did too. Any of the UGB background documents, I know I threw a lot of acronyms around. Some of them have been on the website. If you have questions about that. The state requirements, those location factors, the Goal 14 process, and again, anything about those, any of the process or schedule or location factors, we'd love to hear it. Okay?
All right. And I'll just add to that, similar to our planning commission and council meeting, we ask that if there are comments that they're limited to 3 minutes in length to make sure everyone has a chance to chat. And
Yeah, and we have microphones. Again, last time we ended up having a pretty lively conversation for a while. I thought there were some really good points made. If you have questions about the cost estimates, as long as it's not about getting this room cooler, because I have zero control over it. Trust me, I left Louisiana for a reason. This is not the Pacific Northwest I ordered. Yes?
Okay, so you're talking about the farmland not high value. Who decides that, and what's considered high value land besides soils good?
It's pretty much soils is what I'm being told. There's a whole classification. It's written into the statute, into the state statute, with a bunch of different soils. So we have a soil expert with the county on our one of our committees. I will say we've had 2 committees as part of this. You probably saw on the schedule a public advisory committee, which is a chance for people to represent the public, to say, hey, how are you engaging the public? What does the public care about? What are questions the public might want to know about this information? And then we have a technical, we had about, I think, 10 people on that committee from different organizations, and some were just, community members who were willing to serve. That committee met, I think, about 7 or 8 times throughout this whole process. The technical advisory committee, we had people from ODOT, people from the county, people from the state, who were really experts in these things. And again, so we got the soils information and we got that classification. That classification is kept by the state. But again, I think the differential is soils. I had to learn about Dayton soils. I didn't know what that was. But again, it's a question of there's certain soil types that there's class 1 through 4, I think, and they're given different priorities. So again, that 3rd priority versus 4th priority, there's certain soil types and instances where they are considered that prime high value, and that is a legal definition that a lot of things kind of go into that. And that's a classification we get told from the state. I'm not.
Can you tested the soils in all of these, all these number zones that you?
Yeah, so we have the soils. I did that map. I can make sure that the soils map is put up. Again, it goes into one of these maps earlier where I showed the different priorities. This one.
That wasn't done as part of this process.
It's
It's
not,
something that
right,
like the U.S. one of the U.S. federal agencies would have done it.
Yeah, that soil classification is given to us. It's not a decision that we're making as part of this, right? It's given to us, and then if it's, there's different, it's like class 3 Dayton soil, yes or no? Is it 3rd or 4th priority? So there's like a whole list, but that inventory, I believe, is done either at the state or federal level. Yeah, with the microphone.
Yes, can you address the industrial land and how that was selected?
Oh, yes.
Because it looks like it was high priority farmland.
I will say this, so 12, the industrial land is something, it looks at not the location factors, but since the EOA says that we need to look for a handful of parcels that are over 20 acres. You're allowed to bring in some amount of land under something called site characteristics. If you have an adopted document like an EOA or an H&A that says that you need land that has particular characteristics, it's suitable for industrial, which means it doesn't have slopes over, I think industrial is 20% or 10%. It's not sloped land, and it's appropriately situated for industrial use. And it is of the parcel size that you need. You're allowed to bring it in for those characteristics. What we did is there were no over 20 acres in the exception land. So we could not meet that need inside the exception land. So then we looked outside the exception land and we tried to say what is best suited for industrial. You can see 12, it's right next to the wastewater treatment plant. It's right behind the wastewater treatment plant. It's also in the fly zone for that airstrip. That hash mark in orange is an airstrip that we were able to exclude as not developable for housing, because airstrips is one of the things that you're allowed to take out. So it's in that flight pattern. It's 2 large, over 20 acres apiece lots, right there situated, but right off of the 211. So we decided that of all of the available large lots, and again, the EOA said they could bring in, I think, up to like say 5. They're looking at bringing in 2. Just that spot right behind the wastewater treatment plant, because even though, yes, it is a higher priority land, there was no exception land that met those characteristics. And of the land that we were looking at, it was probably the least suited for either farming or housing. So it was sort of the most suited for industrial because of that wastewater treatment plant and because of the highway and the size of the parcels. Great question, thank you. I did mean to talk about that and I had skipped over it. Yeah.
Residential land. You have 2 sections there on the map.
Yeah.
To you is, let's say that I border that yellow section and I have 5 acres, flat level, and I wanted to be included in that. Now what?
Now what is
And I'm
that-
not speaking for just myself. I'm speaking for a couple people that I know of.
I think the reason we didn't go further down or on the other side of Molalla Avenue further down, again, I also, another thing on this map I wanted to mention is you'll see those pink ones. The EOA also said a little bit of commercial land, a small lot commercial was needed. Or would be beneficial, and there are some parcels there that we found were currently being used for small lot commercial, so we were going to bring those in as commercial, but we did stick only on the other side, and for this expansion, we don't have enough need to go any further down Molalla Avenue.
Okay, I understand
Yeah,
that.
'cause
What
we-
about west of Rachel Larkin? Why didn't you go that direction further?
Again, because the further we get away from Molalla Avenue, the more expensive it gets. And so in order to bring in, again, the most efficient and to keep it as close to the existing UGB and as close to public facilities, we went, again, as far down 8 and 9 until we hit that number. But again, on 5, we tried to keep it as close to Molalla Avenue and the existing UGB as possible. And just when we started to pull in a couple of parcels, now we're over. Okay, we go down, you know what I mean? Like that's really what it's coming down to. If there's a reason that you feel like those parcels are on the other side, or the parcels on the other side of Warwick Road or further down Molalla Avenue are better situated under any of these location factors than, say, some of the more southern portion of Onaway, like maybe go down a little bit less on Onaway and further on Molalla Avenue, then I beg you to fill out a comment card. Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you know of the land. Again, that is amazing. I can't do my job without public engagement and knowing the reality, right? This is what we're looking at based on the reports on paper, but I'm very interested to hear if you feel like there's a reason why those lots. I will warn you, I heard 5 acres. More parcelized does make it more difficult, right? You end up with a bunch of different property owners. If we look at 8 and 9, like 8, again, you can see like those big, one of the reasons to go that far down 8 and 9 is like once you grab that 10 acres and then you get another 10.2, right? We're trying to land on a particular number, right? So again, these are sort of larger lots. There is that 1 5-acre, and then again, these are all, there's a couple of 5 and 6 right there by the UGB. But as you get further down, it's that question of there's essentially 3 10-acre lots. That's like, do we bring in those 30 acres, or do we pay to go all the way down Molalla Avenue and bring in 30 acres that's 6 different owners because the lots are at 5 acre. You know what I mean? So it's 3 owners here or 6 here. But if there's a location factor that speaks to, that you know that, hey, this is persuasive, or this is how I feel about it, please fill out a comment card. I will look at it. I will absolutely look at it. But that's how we ended up, right?
I'll add on the flip side, like Violet's saying, that this is the time for perhaps a little bit of horse trading, and maybe we get a comment card in that says, hey, you know, this parcel floods every year, like the entire parcel floods except for where my house is. We may use that as a basis, for example, to remove some parcels from what we've said, and in that case, it
And
could be a little
I'll
horse
add on that. I want you to finish, but I want to add on one of the things that this brought up that if I don't say it now, I don't want to forget. The next phase of this is a local wetlands inventory to actually, okay, if this land is coming in, now we have the authority to inventory it for wetlands. That'll be very telling in terms of what actually gets developed. There is then a whole concept plan part. Bringing this in for residential doesn't change the zoning. We need to do a concept plan. I'll be probably out here doing a whole other public meeting saying, okay, this is the new land. This is where we think the road should go. This is what we think the zoning should be. What do you think about it? We have to actually plan it after it gets brought in. So again, we have a residential need. We're bringing it in for residential. It has to be suited for it. We have to, you know, it has to pass the straight face test of like, yes, this is land being brought in for residential. But what the zoning is, what the density, where the roads would go, that's all going to get part of a concept plan. That will be a whole planning process with a whole round of public engagement just like this. Yeah, go ahead. You now finish your comment.
Oh, and just to finish it off, so if the yellow area represents 198 acres, if I understood you correctly.
It's about 175.
175, but you said you needed almost 200, or you only needed 100?
We can't go over 198.
Okay, so you have room to pick up a couple more, but that was my question was,
Yeah.
if some of that yellow turns into wetlands, then you're going to be needing other properties.
Yeah, and I will say the 198 is, we make an assumption, right? We're trying to hit 1,100 units, 1114, right? We make an assumption that the zoning's gonna average out between R1 at 5, R2 at 10 units an acre, and R3 at 20. We're assuming it's gonna an average of 7 across the board. So we assume we can get 7 units an acre, and then we're allowed to add 25% for infrastructure, roads, right-of-way, actual, and that 25% also includes some parkland and things like that. So again, it isn't, there is a 25% assumption that if, you know, if we do an inventory and some of it comes out as not as developable as we thought, again, we are dealing with an average of 7 across the board and a buffer of 25%.
And the last question
Yeah.
is just to finish, in those yellow areas, with all the apartments that have gone up in Molalla in the last 5 years, is that land still apartment capable, or is we talking residential?
Yes, so this is one of the reasons, that's a very good question, by the way. So this is one of the reasons, if you read the report last year, you'll see that the rezoning that happened inside the UGB was almost all for R3, which is your more dense, you're more like apartments, right? So R2 and R3 was what got rezoned close inside, because that's what makes sense close inside, right? Is your more dense uses. So we did that, and I thought what makes sense, what's practical, is if we did all this rezoning and the H&A says I need 2,000 units, 55% of which are R1, and then this 20% are R2 and 25% are R3, which is what's in the H&A. So there's a number for each of those types. Our rezoning took care of the whole need for R3 and all but like 34 units of the R2. So I had assumed we could use the density of 5 units an acre because all of the expansion would really be for R1 because that was the only remaining need after our efficiency measures and our rezoning. I was then told, because we're using the sequential, the state came back and said, no, you're locked in on this sequential
And the safe harbor.
method,
Yeah.
and therefore you have to use 7, which is the rule. The report you saw last year said we needed, say, 200 and something acres, because I was assuming it would all be R1, which is less dense. but now we have to use 7. I had to go back and redo the math last week, and now we're down to the 198. So we're assuming, but again, when it comes time to concept plan that area, we will absolutely be looking at the fact, we'll be looking at the entire new UGB, everything that is now inside the UGB, and if we have all we need of R3 and R2 elsewhere, then it would not be zoned for higher density. What's remaining of your need is R1, which is up to 5.
And just to give an idea of what that looks like, 7 units per acre is roughly what like Big Meadow subdivision is. That's roughly the density level that you're looking at.
7 units the minimum or the maximum?
So it would be R1 and R2. So some of it would be 4 to 8, and some of it would be 6 to 12, and
Yeah.
and
So
the balance would average out to 7. That'd be the aim of the balance.
Right, so again, the 7 is not zoning. The 7 is an assumption that the state is requiring us to make in order to say, I need 1,000 units, how many acres is that? It is not what the ultimate zoning at the end of the day would be. Your R1 is up to 5 units an acre, and R2 has an average of about 10 units an acre. And again, there would be no reason to put R3 out there when your R3 has already been rezoned inside. Yeah, up front.
Question on that map there, you have the green that says reserved for open. What does that mean? Second question is the white spot underneath there, how come that's not included for reserved for open?
It was included in an earlier map. I can't remember if that one was put up on Molalla Current or not. It was included. And then we were told we had to redo our math on that 7, and our need went from 232 down to 198.
Are you talking about the white spot on Matthias
On-
Road?
Correct, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the other one, the one on Matthias.
No.
No, he's talking about that
On
one.
South.
On Forest Road.
Okay, got you.
And so we ended up, that was one that was being brought in and then was taken out, mainly because of the proximity of those wetlands on the parcels just north of it.
Right.
And whether or not it made sense, because also as you go away from Molalla, those are, if I showed you the parcels, they're 2 long parcels with, right? So we looked, I mean, I'll be frank with you, I mean, you asked me, I'll tell you, right?
Yeah.
So they have a small connection on Molalla Ave where the services would go, and then they're kind of long out that way.
Right.
So in terms of trying to hit that right number, they were included when we needed 228 acres, when we had to drop down below not to exceed 198, taking out those 2 that are, I think they're roughly about 10 acres. Taking those out got us to the right number.
So what does the green mean? Reserved for open, what does open mean?
So it would actually be zoned public, semi-public, but most likely for those ones, I mean, those are basically wetlands down there. From at least what the state inventory says, we do a wetlands inventory on them.
Yeah, so this is that sub area we're talking about. So the top ones, the 19.2 acres, the 16.9, and those smaller ones attached to it are now currently being listed as coming in for open space. And then the ones south of it, that 13 and 11, those are not coming in right now.
So I still don't understand the definition of what does open mean? No future potential to build, no commercial. What does open mean? Yeah.
So yeah, right. It would likely, like I said, it would likely be zoned public, semi-public. So you could build like public facilities on there. The main reason that we're interested in bringing in is our Parks and Trails master plan actually has a trail that runs along Bear Creek down there.
Yeah.
So there's an interest in having it as open space, and I think the owner of those parcels is interested in doing some wetland mitigation. It'd be easier to sort of manage it if all those properties were in the city.
So again,
that's the idea.
it's not necessarily, again, there's different rules of bringing in the park. It's not meeting the housing needs. So since the park is coming in and there's that trails master plan with a trail going through Bear Creek, and it feels like those wetlands sort of connect onto what is Ivor Davies Park. If the city's bringing in the park for as city land, then kind of including those made a certain amount of sense. We'll see what the state says about it. But again, bringing it in for, open space or whatever we're identifying it, the state would have to approve that, and then again, a whole concept plan would have to happen. Part of it is because of that trail, and what's planned there. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh yeah, something I didn't really see get mentioned is you guys do have a master plan parks plan that's going to bring a multi-use path through town, connect the north and the south together through the parks area and go out by the river, and also a concrete truck route to help bring the truck traffic out of the middle of town and get it wrapped around the outside. Is that not correct in this same expansion plan?
Dan, you want to speak to that?
Sure, and so, it's correct, you're correct about where the Parks and Trails master plan is saying it. Are you asking with regards to how Parks and Trails would be planned in the expansion areas?
Well, no, just when I see the cost analysis and like say the roundabouts that are getting put in.
Yeah.
They stated that the Molalla River Road would need to be a concrete road for, like, isn't that for truck routes, or would that be, what's there as far as what's listed in the traffic study, I guess?
Oh, you mean in the Dyer study, or is it considered that way?
Study for the traffic problem.
Yeah.
For the
You
traffic
don't think so?
things.
Are you talking about Molalla?
Wall Forest, yeah.
As it comes off of Main Street?
Yeah, like through Matthias.
I don't think it's planned to be concrete.
Oh, I thought that I just whenever I was reading.
Well, and also in addition, in addition to a local wetlands inventory and a concept plan for the area, once the concept plan is done for what we, are envisioning for this area based on the community's vision and the work that'll go into that, the TSP, the Transportation Systems Plan, will also need to be updated. So that's when it gets really decided what are the priorities for transportation updates. Dyer might have made some assumptions. And we did, we did have a conversation with ODOT is on our technical advisory committee. So there were some conversations, but again, those are sort of preliminary until they actually get adopted into transportation, the TSP, because I can't say transportation right now.
So like where they showed the cost for each individual section, it also showed what traffic improvements would need to be done for each section. What was the roundabout, River Road and Molalla
Right.
Ave? What was the multi-path for the park?
Right.
Connectivity from the master plan, and it was basically in there in that language
Yeah, and again,
from them.
there are some assumptions that the state will let you make when you're trying to predict out.
Okay.
You're right, you're trying to forecast what the cost would be.
Okay.
That report doesn't turn into an adopted TSP,
That
right?
makes
So again, we're making some assumptions, just like the density. I would say the transportation assumptions in the cost estimates are similar to that 7 units an acre density. It's an assumption so that we can get as close as we can with our crystal ball to try to figure out, we're not just making stuff up, right? We're basing it on some assumptions that have either some legal background, or there's some background it's in a plan, it's what's happened before, or it's the amount of development we usually see here. You have to base it on something, right? So again, I think those assumptions around the transportation improvements that would be necessary were to get us to a cost estimate. But when it comes time to actually plan it, there will be a whole TSP with a transportation firm doing traffic analysis, which didn't happen as part of the Dyer report.
So kind of like the circulation roads within the areas too, could be changed also.
Those are correct.
Things to kind of figure some stuff out.
Right.
Exactly, the specifics of those are crayon,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
gives an idea.
Yeah. I see the microphone.
Yeah, I think you may have answered it, but I'm still not clear. And I've got two, and another question has to do with the density part of it.
Yeah.
If you've gone to 7 units per acre, but yet your zoning code is built on 5, it seems like you're gonna undercount the number of acres that you need, is the first question.
Well, the zoning, right, the R1, your least dense zoning,
Right.
is averages about 5 units an acre.
Okay.
And then your R2 is 10 and your R3 is 20. But the safe harbor provisions under the law require an assumption of 7 throughout.
Yeah.
So another thing is just because, like, say the density allows up to a certain amount, that doesn't mean that's what you see on an average, right? So again, they're just saying for the assumption of the amount of acres, and again, this is looked at again every 8 years, right? There's a check-in at 4 years where you say, okay, how much housing is being produced and where, how are we doing on our targets, and then there's a check-in at 8 where they have to do the analysis all over again about how much land you have.
Okay. So then getting back to the transportation part, at 7 per acre, you've got a density and a potential another big housing district out here that it looks to me like you're going to try and move that all right through the middle of town to get out to 211 and 213?
Well, let's look at it. Let's go back to this one. So again, yeah, I think what we're looking at is as it stands now, there's a couple of connections, right? We couldn't go down 213, right? And now I don't know, I'm not a transportation, but because that land is not in the exception land, so it's a different priority. So we can't, 9 only gets us that close to the 213, not actually onto it, right? So we've got Molalla Forest Road, and then we've got some these couple of connections back. So as of now, those are going to be the connections that will bring people back sort of up to the 211, where the buses are and grocery shopping and some of the schools and stuff. But yeah, that's.
But we know that most of our population here is commuting north. I mean, I live on 213 and I see it every morning. I know how many people are going north every day.
Yeah.
And so now you're taking a population density that's roughly the size of Big Meadow, and or a density equivalent to that, and you're pushing it right through the middle of town. If I'm a commuter and I'm looking at that coming home and going every day, I'm just wondering what kind of conversations are going on about how to mitigate that issue.
That'll come in the concept plan. It'll come in the TSP.
If you look at area 9 on this map right here, there's a line that goes east and west there. There's actually, in our TSP currently, there's an actual roadway that goes through there, planned. I mean, all this stuff we're talking about is planned. Okay, so if you come up the Forest Road, you can connect to that road going over to 213 and get around all the congestion that way. We have to dump them somewhere, so they have a choice. But that's in the current TSP, and when we go through the concept plans that Violet is talking about, that stuff will be solidified.
Right.
Because we still have more steps to go through.
And again, if the question under the law was, where is the most efficient, like what, if we looked at the cost estimates and said which parcels of these are the cheapest, right? Then there may have been a question of north, because it was slightly cheaper for some of the areas, right? Not when we average out if 8 and 9 share the cost of what goes down Onaway, it brings that per unit down and it's much more comparable. But even without that, they were fairly comparable. And again, with being a different priority land, it has to be prohibitively expensive, not just somewhat cheaper to go a different way. So it has to be south, according to the law. And then we do look at traffic and transportation patterns when picking across areas of the same priority. But those patterns, those commuting patterns under the law aren't a reason for me to be able to kind of jump a priority. But they will be part of the conversation for the concept plan and for the future TSP and how it actually gets planned. Yeah.
Hi, my question is for the industrial land. We have large areas of Molalla that have industrial land that's unused. I mean, we have a mill that's been defunct for years and years, and it's already in the city limits.
Yeah, so the EOA, I will say, My firm didn't do the economic opportunities analysis, but I was here when it got adopted because my housing plan was being put up at the same time. Johnson Economics went through it, and we have that chart I shared. That was their findings, and City Council heard testimony on it and adopted it it was a year ago, February, so February of 2025. And this is their summary of what is needed based on what you have. So they looked at everything that you have, and they looked at what they anticipate as economists are needed for job growth. And that's where they found that there was, that it should be the city's goal to accommodate 2 additional sites that are over 20 acres. They said that's something that you don't have enough of. Now, I'm sure they considered if there are sites that are over 20 acres, they're not saying you have none. They're just saying based on what you need, you're short 2. And that's what we ended up doing. They also said there could be 4 sites in the 10 to 20 acres and a couple of sites that are a little bit smaller. And the city's not trying to accommodate that right now. We're really just looking at those 2 large lots. Yeah, I got more hands in the back. Either one. Yeah, bring them a microphone.
Good evening, everybody. I'm listening to your discussion of the planning process, and I know that it's based upon an outdated population forecast, which predicts 5,000 more people in Molalla. The negative impacts of that are great, and we haven't really discussed that much. This gentleman mentioned about traffic, and adding 50% more people to the city is going to make commuting much more uncomfortable and difficult, and the vast majority of people here do go to work somewhere else. We also haven't mentioned the impact on the Molalla River, which is down to a trickle now in the fall, and it's likely doesn't have enough water to supply the needs of this increase in population. And of course, the paving over a farmland is a tragedy when it's not necessary to do. And if I'm really curious about, you had the option to use the updated population forecast, which have been 40% less, 3,000 people instead of 5,000. It would have reduced greatly these impacts that you're talking about, the various types of planning that you're doing. And I think it would have made Molalla, kept Molalla a more happy, healthy, and livable community. So I'm really curious about the motivation behind
I'm happy to talk about that. I think impacts of growth on the river, very important. I know the river keepers put in a comment, a public comment on when the city council was considering just that issue. I will say, when you say city council voted to not redo the H&A based on the lower population forecast. So, that's what we're required to follow their direction on that. Again, those decisions being that, there were over $100,000 of taxpayer dollars in years of spent doing this, and no guarantee that the population projection wouldn't go right back up by the time we got to adoption. I will say that my personal take on this, dealing with these population projections, we've called for other jurisdictions, we've called Portland State and been like, can you walk us through your process, your methodology? How are you getting to these numbers? And they'll tell you birth rates, death rates, and buying patterns or whatever. But I will say what does happen is there was a little bit of a lag coming out of the pandemic, and population projections changed drastically. We don't usually see a big drastic change. They did change drastically. I don't know that those assumptions aren't something that will then just rebound right back up next year when new population projections come out again. So that was the decision, but I do want to speak to the river and the traffic, because I want you to remember those are very important impacts, and they are impacts of growth. They are impacts of new housing. They are impacts of urbanization of new land. Absolutely. What we're deciding right now is, do we plan for this number of people? Do we plan for 5,000 people, or do we plan for 3,000 people? If we plan for 5,000 people, and 5,000 people don't happen, it actually ends up being more like 3,000, then we've brought in some acres. We haven't paved it. We've maybe rezoned it, maybe not even annexed it. If that population projection does not happen, one, it'll get course corrected in 8 years when we look at this again. We're not gonna just not look at it for 2043 and all of a sudden we've committed to 5,000. You're also not deciding, should we grow by 3,000 or should we go by 5? You're deciding, what should we plan around? Do we need to plan around 5? Do we think 5 will happen, or do we think 3 will happen? The benefit of doing the 5, of going with what we have is A, it's already adopted. You know, all the efficiencies we've already talked about. But also, if we bring in 175 acres, and again, in a few years we realize actually that growth was a little bit high, we don't need to expand, right? That development's not going to occur at that level, right? We're not committing to development, right? We're just saying what should we assume when we try to decide how much to bring in. Again, these are, at this stage, these are hypothetical people, right? They don't exist yet, they haven't been born yet, or they're still in elementary school and they're not trying to buy their first house yet, right? We're talking about what assumptions should we make on paper so that we can say we have enough housing space so that we don't face a housing crisis in the coming years with prices going so high that we can't afford to still live in Molalla. So again, it's an assumption.
Something that should be mentioned is that as you said, the population forecast was difficult for Portland State to do because of COVID. And the current one, we actually talked to the people at Portland State and they said that was an anomaly. It's not something that commonly happens. So the updated one that they're using is probably much more accurate, and probably given the fact that natural population growth is going down now, more people are dying than being born, it's challenging to even think that there's going to be that kind of population growth. However, what happens is, you'll notice, of course, as this planning is going on, wealthy people are buying land all around the city with the anticipation of this growth. And I just wonder sometimes how much pressure that is on the city to make its plans too. But thank you for your explanation.
Thank you. Yes, right here in the front.
I would like to know the number one farmland and how permit to develop. That's my question is.
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Number one farmland.
Yeah.
And I tried it once, and they said that they couldn't develop the house. So how I'm gonna get to the permit,
Is this a county land?
Oh, it's 18.
We own a
right
parcel
there, yeah.
in
Partial.
sub-area 18.
In 18?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So again, if one of the things that I've talked to the city about, you may recall when there was the prioritization, there was something called urban reserves, which would come in first along with exception land. They did just, as of January 1st, like I mentioned, it was like, oh, there's no such thing as an H&A anymore, now it's an HCA. I will say that was another piece that was discussed with City Council when they were talking about redoing it, because there were new rules for how these H&As get done that went into effect on January 1st. And so in February, when City Council was considering, do we repeal the old H&A and go forward with the new HCA with this new population projections, they were looking at, well, it's more taxpayer dollars, it's more time, but it's also, the rules are a little unknown, right? I just had a webinar last week the state did on how to interpret the rules that went into effect in January. We're still being told how to do it. One of the things that they redid was how to define land as an urban reserve. That would make it first priority when it was otherwise not. Those rules have become much more relaxed lately, but again, that is something that's with the county that the city doesn't have control of because it's outside of the city boundary. But there are steps that you can go to, like say you're an exception land. If you don't want to be exception land, you can talk to the county about changing your designation. But I know that is difficult. But I unfortunately, I'm not with the county. I don't know the steps on going about individual property decisions. For me, I just have to use what the county has as their designation and interpret it for our decisions. But you can work with the county to try to get your land rezoned, or if you are interested in coming in and you want to be part of urban reserves, that would be a process that would happen in the future outside of the UGB process.
Well, I just wonder, annex the city, it may be a little better, or?
Well, you can't annex into the city unless you're part of the urban growth boundary. And we can't bring anything in that's not exception land right now, because again, we have 580 acres and only 198 acres of need. So unless it meets that industrial need of those 2 parcels that we're looking for, we can't bring in anything that is not exception land at this point under the rules the way they stand and under our cost estimates that we have on record. Yeah, on the.
Okay.
I understand you're not a transportation person, but just as a general thought, how is Molalla foresee dealing with the traffic within the town of Molalla? Let's not even talk about 213 or 211, but I mean, this is a lot of traffic. I mean, I know I avoid Main Street because it's a paved road out there. What's the concept? What's going to, what are you thinking?
Right.
How this is all going to work?
So the next.
You're asking above my pay grade, but maybe somebody in the room knows about it. Again, I would be happy to work on a transportation plan next. But again, that's really something people who work for the city or live in the city might have more information.
So the next phase of this project is that transportation concept planning. And we plan to do that we plan to apply for that in 2 phases. So the first one would be transportation planning for the area that would be brought into the exception lands. And the second one is an overhaul of the transportation master plan. The other piece is that and I don't quite have it, what's all going to be under one and what's all going to be under the next first, but there's going to be two stages of updates to that master plan. With that said, also transportation improvements will be coming with development in that in our current transportation master plan, there's certain thresholds that when you hit them, they require new signalization, for example. So I know that's a big issue in a number of different parts of town. The lands that we rezoned, for example, if a subdivision were to be built out in that neighborhood, they would almost certainly, and I don't want to make promises because I haven't run the numbers, but they would almost certainly trigger that light at Leroy, which would drastically change the traffic patterns on 211. So that's just one example.
Okay,
So go ahead.
The subplot 8 and 9 basically would be fed by Molalla Avenue South.
Yeah.
And then I don't,
And
people were talking about 213, but I don't know that area too well, so I'm not sure.
well, so Molalla Forest Road would sort of run into Onaway and then 211 itself. Yeah.
So from what you said before with now is alive, Main and South Molalla Avenue, that will increase quite a bit in traffic.
There'd be
And I will say,
there could be more traffic going through that area. Yeah.
And plus, there is that dip that floods every winter.
yeah.
So I think what we need to actually stop and think about is what Mr. Zinder said previously is we need to look at those things. We need to study those things. We have a transportation master plan today. We have a TSP. We don't know which areas we're going to need to actually update that plan with until we go through this process.
I understand, but I mean, kind of a general idea, it seems evident that Molalla Avenue South.
Not necessarily, because you have Molalla Forest Road that goes sort of from.
East and west, but it crosses.
But I also talked about another roadway that's already in our TSP currently that goes from Molalla Forest Road and Ona Way directly west to 213, which would allow people to use the Forest Road to come up and go directly out to 213 and never actually contact with Main Street. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. That road's actually in our TSP today.
right.
And it's not built, obviously, because there's no development. We use development to get us places sometimes, because there isn't a bank of money sitting over here that we have that we dip into to build roads. That just doesn't exist. You'll learn that. So anyway, I think the concepts of these things we have to look at, and you all will have an opportunity to participate in that.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember, just like the gentleman in the back, we were talking about the forecast and the population forecast. I had a similar conversation with the school district. They're on our committee, one of our committees, and we talked about the difference between when we're deciding on land supply, there's a certain amount of assumptions and forecasts and some things we can just say, well, we're going to assume a certain density, we're going to assume a certain forecast of population. But when you actually come down to planning where a road is going to go and what school is going to service that, that happens once development, as Dan said, once development's actually happening, right? So for land supply, we can be hypothetical, right? But we can't build roads and schools based on hypothetical development we think is going to happen in the future. So it gets a little,
Yeah, I understand that, but we live here, we drive these roads,
absolutely.
We're in the county, we're rural. It just, you cross that area, it's where two big developments might happen. Tractors go on Sawtell Road.
Yeah, and right. You're absolutely correct.
Logging trucks.
Right.
100 miles an hour down Sawtell, down Molalla.
Yeah, well, and you're absolutely correct. What you're talking about is exactly what needs to happen sort of next, right? So we have to predict that some of that development, we have to predict that growth, and then once we let the land in, when we see when people actually apply to be annexed, or when development applications go in, then we say, okay, you want to develop here? What is that going to do to traffic? How are people going to get to work? How are people going to get to, and then we can start making some of those decisions. And again, as was mentioned earlier, that is also going to be a public process with community engagement. Probably, we might be out here with maps and you'll be drawing and showing me where the traffic is, and we'll be figuring it out. For now, we're not allowed to kind of assume that. We have to really just say, talk at that higher level of land supply, and then when it comes to actually approving development and building roads, we need to dig in and have a plan ahead of it. Yeah.
So, first, I want to do one correction for you.
Yes,
and
go
it's
ahead.
on the city documentation as well, and it says UGB expansion area are not required to annex into the city, and that's partially true.
Yeah.
Where landowners can request to annex into the city, but also there is a concept that the city utilizes that's called annexation islands. And so if most of your neighbors, it doesn't have to be all, decide to annex into the city, even though you choose not to, that's a legislative decision based on our city charter that the city council, which if you are being annexed in, you did not elect those people, right?
Yeah,
they get to make that decision for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of time spent last time.
So I'm just clarifying that for you, but, and that's not what my questions were going to be about.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so I looked through everything and I couldn't, there's cost estimations for all the different sub areas, but not for that sub area 12. And then also, along with that, the city doesn't have really a formal economic development policy or program currently, but typically the city's methodology is to be shovel ready, and that's a terminology the city uses. And so, shovel ready can be a lot of things, but when it comes to, and you're talking about that growth that we may not need, right? Or we may not, and say, well, you can just adjust in 8 years. Well, we can't adjust backwards. And all the planning that the city does, say, like getting those properties ready to be shovel ready, because they're not going to have tenants before we start getting them shovel ready, right? Getting the utilities out there. That's going to be costs that the taxpayers and the ratepayers for public utilities put in ahead of that development. And when that development comes, there's no guarantee we're going to get that money back. we'd also need to make sure there is like some kind of guarantees in the zoning to make sure those lot sizes did stay those large sizes, that they're being included because they're the large sizes and not, you know, get divided up into smaller sizes also. But also that infrastructure is going to be mostly publicly paid. So that's going to be millions of dollars of taxpayers' funds to get those properties ready. Are we going to get the return back? We don't even know. We don't even know what industries are going to come. We don't have, you know, any potential employers. We don't know what type of jobs they're going to bring, if they're warehouse jobs that pay minimum wage or they're family wage jobs, and how many of them. But also then, you know, back at the water supply, you know, and we do have the water rights. The city says we have the water rights, and they're correct. But we don't have the adequate storage for those peak periods. And we already are looking at building additional storage, and that is additional public costs that we will be, the taxpayers and the ratepayers will be putting ahead of that development that we will require. So even though, you know, we might not need, those people might not come, they might not develop that land, our infrastructure, our utilities and our services have to be ready for them to come in case they come. So just, you know, arbitrarily saying, well, we can look at it again in 8 years, even though the population forecasts that people are looking out and they're starting to trend down, even from this latest one that's already 40% of the previous one. So the, you know, and those people aren't going to come. That means that we're not going to get our money back from this infrastructure either. And if we got the money back anyway, what if they got, you know, there's, we are required to work on affordability. We're required to work on incentives, economic incentives. Those are great, but they are also going to cost us money. And at a time when people are already struggling, for us to put in that much public money for people that might not come, for employers that might not come, is a big ask of the community.
Okay, thank you. I want to say a couple of things. One, we did spend a lot of time last time. I think you bring up a really good point in terms of the annexation. I think the example last time, and we had a representative from DLCD who was able to give some really good answers on this, was like, well, if all of your neighbors develop and public facilities are then extended, once that development happens, public facilities then come in, and then you put into the county for a new septic or something. If you have public facilities near you, you might not get that permit from the county to fix your septic, and then you're sort of forced your hand into annexation. So we did spend a significant amount of time, for those of you who were here last time, discussing the fact that there are some situations where it could happen that a property owner would feel, while not legally required to annex, would feel like their hand was being forced. Absolutely. Absolutely. So you make a very good point on that.
I'd say about 10 years, the city looks at the map, and there are properties that get kind of surrounded by other properties that get annexed into the city, and it's just like it's a kind of clean things up, and it's not really, there isn't a land use decision pending, you know, property improvement that is pending, or anything that like that really drives that. It's just like, well, does it make sense to just bring them into the city now because everyone, which I mean is fair, but I'm just saying that, you know, say that.
Right, there are instances. So you're absolutely right in that, and we talked about that last time. I'll also say on the industrial, on the site characteristics, there is a requirement if something comes in on site characteristics that says it's coming in because it has certain characteristics. Those characteristics have to be maintained. So if it's brought in as large lot, it needs to be maintained as large lot. It can't be broken up because that's why you brought it in.
So, and just to make sure everybody who's left in this room hears me say this out loud, we do not front load infrastructure extensions. Those are done by developers, or the cost of doing business in the city of Molalla, and any other city for that matter, is you get to extend the water and sewer lines. We don't do that for you. And the only site, so anyway, I just wanted everybody to know that. So we're not going to be out any infrastructure costs, and we don't build it and they will come. That is from a movie that doesn't exist, that doesn't happen here. Okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I think we have 10 minutes left. Okay? Oh, wait, sorry, she was next.
I just want to say that so far, what Molalla has done in their growth, I don't think they've planned it like everybody's talking about the traffic. And all those millions of apartments have one way out. And now you want to put houses in there that have that same way out. So I think you better really think about our roadways before we even think about any kind of growth, because they haven't done a very good job thus far in their planning of traffic and growth.
Yeah. And I hear what you're saying, absolutely. Again, I don't commute through here.
I know you don't live here,
right,
I know you're not from here, but I'm just telling you, that's how it is, and it's been that way for 30 years, since they put big meadows in.
Right. Unfortunately, for tonight and for the decision we're making, is the city's legally required to bring in.
I understand that.
190 acres. It isn't a question, it isn't for the city to say, yes, we want to bring in 190 acres, or we don't, we have to. The question is where, right? That is literally the only choices that the city has, and under the law, they're only allowed to bring in the exception land. So again, I think your community, I think people in your community, you guys are bringing up really important points. I think they're absolutely true. Growth has a lot of consequences. Yeah.
Why would they want to expand when they can't even take care of what they've got?
Right. I hear what you're saying.
You know, what's the projection? Where are they going to get the money to take care of all these extra roads? And don't tell me from the taxes, because Big Meadows came in, and there was all kinds of tax money from all those homeowners. Did we get a middle school? No. Did we get good streets? No. What did we get? Decorative lights down Main Street?
More taxes.
Yeah. And flowers.
My understanding is, yes, you have to do the study, yes, you have to predict, but you don't have to necessarily do it, right?
If there is a documented housing need, then we have to expand. You have to accommodate for housing under the law. So
based on the population.
Based on the population projection. Again, Molalla hit 10,000. That's where that cities under 10,000 don't have to do it. Molalla hit 10,000. Was required to do it. We did it H&A. Another firm did. I didn't do it. The H&A happened in 2022. It was adopted, I think, very early in 2023. That's based on 2022 numbers, right? Because of the way that happens. It got adopted, and then we went forward with the HPS and figuring out this UGB and all the efficiency measures. Again, there is that option that has been discussed and was voted on by City Council, which is, should we go back and redo all of that work based on 3,000 instead of 5,000? Unfortunately, it's not a zero number. It's still 3,000 population growth, so there would still be some expansion, but it might not be as much. But again, that was voted down. And I think there are, we've mentioned all the reasons why they decided on that.
But is it a total obligation?
We can't go
Despite the
middle of town.
the study is
Come on,
required,
we're
but to go
jam-packed.
ahead with.
Yes. Once a housing land deficit has been found, that you do not have enough land for the predicted housing, you must expand. You must expand to show that you have accommodated enough space for growth. Otherwise, you've got like a pressure cooker.
Is that in increments?
No. I mean, I think we're, like, literally this process has been going on. We, new rules came in on January 1st. We're still under a sequential work plan that was adopted in 2023, 2024, trying to get this done. I mean, at this point, it's kind of, it's been going on long enough. I think, we're going to have to show to the state by the end of the year that we have made enough space that will accommodate that projected growth.
Yeah, but we have to have widened roads where we can't do downtown Molalla because there's buildings there. Unless you're gonna knock down these old buildings, how are you gonna widen the road? How are you gonna make room for all these vehicles? You're gonna have to build a different highway, and you're gonna need land for that too. So, I mean, it's just like a revolving door. it doesn't work.
Corwin, you had a question? I wanna
Yeah,
make sure we-
sorry, it should be quick. I might follow up with an email just so other people have time too.
Yeah.
But, so one thing that was mentioned twice was the idea of shared costs from like adjoining sub areas and development that would be progressive. So like 8 and 9 make total sense. The cost would be shared progressively as that moves out. So is that a formal consideration that's like baked into the analysis that the like standalone cost total and then the per unit cost, we are expecting it to go down, and that is that considered as part of like why the parcels are selected?
Let's see.
Or is it kind of informal, I guess?
Right, it's us interpreting those costs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we understand that price tag appears multiple times because it's part of the cost of serving 8, it's part of the cost of serving 9. But we know if we select from 8 and 9, then that cost per unit goes down, because then we could think of it as one area and say that one expansion is now not going to create 100 units, it might create 200 units, and therefore the cost per unit goes down. But that was a decision in terms of the engineers when they have to say, what is the cost per unit in 9? They have to assume that infrastructure is only going to serve 9, right? So that was more of an understanding in terms of reading the numbers, and then us saying, okay, but if you're going to say, it says it's X amount of dollars per unit, I just wanted you guys to understand that does shift once you show what you're bringing in. That
Gotcha,
was all.
okay.
It was just an interpretation of the numbers.
And I guess the inverse of that,
Yeah.
so like sub-area 5 is like both drawn on the map and is functionally an island. It's boxed in
Yeah.
by Danson's, by the Avison wetland, by the park, by some easements that prohibit development. So that standalone cost and the individual unit cost actually can't be shared right now.
As of right now, 5 is not sharing the cost going down Molalla Avenue with anything other than those commercial on the other side. If we had a larger land need and we brought in, stuff from across Molalla Avenue, then again, the per unit cost would go down. The cost of the infrastructure doesn't go down, it's just who it's serving, right?
Yeah.
So if there is a future need and we look for more land, again, trying to be efficient with those costs, we would say, well, we've already extended down Molalla Avenue, so anything touching that would be the most efficient use of those facilities.
Okay, cool, thank you. I'll have some follow-ups on email, but I just wanted to check
Perfect,
on that.
thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you guys want to go with 9, 8, and 7, right? Like I heard a lot of you guys say it is going to be a
9, 8, and 5.
9, 8, and 5. Where's 7 going to go?
Well, 7 is sort of in the middle. Again, it's a little too far from Onaway.
So I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
You guys are gonna go with all that? How's all the traffic gonna go through? You guys gonna try to get it through 213? Wouldn't it make more sense for you guys to go with 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18?
We can't.
But common sense works? I don't know, I'm sorry.
We can't, because.
It's just, it's easier, because we farm some of the land on that farmland. It's not protected. It's shitty land. Excuse my language.
Yeah, but you don't have to sell your land.
I don't have to sell it, but instead of going 8, 9, 8, 7, you're dealing with 20 other people. We have 100 acres, 50-acre parcels. We could make it easy, and one developer could come there and make a lot cheaper cost for any of you guys kids here owning their own home. That's all I wanted to say. And if I'm wrong, prove me wrong. And for the fire chief here, it's going to be a lot easier for him to drive into one road, put a fire out, and we are done.
Why won't those work?
What's that?
Why won't they work? You said they won't work?
I'm saying, again, when we talked about the exception land, those 580 acres to the south, the county has granted that land an exclusion from exclusive farm use. So it is identified as land that is already urbanized, and therefore it has to be our first priority. So if we needed 600 acres, if we needed 800 acres, we could take the land to the south, the exception land, and then go into the second, third, and fourth priority land, which is everything to the north. But we cannot, they are not treated.
My biggest question about everything is, you're gonna go 9, 8, 7, you're gonna deal with like 30 people, a developer's gonna come in there, what if one person does not wanna cut into their land? So a developer's gonna be, oh, this is gonna cost me a lot more, so each lot is gonna cost you a shit ton more money.
Right, and that's exactly why parcelization and the number of parcels is one of the factors, and we have to consider it, but I cannot,
I just hope you guys put that into consideration and make, things good. At least for the Molalla people. I don't know where you're from, but, I just want to say that out loud.
Yeah, again, I think I hear what you're saying, and if the question was, if the law let us, if the legal framework in Oregon just let us say what makes the most sense to the community, let's pick that land. But again, we have these priorities that say we have to use certain types of land first before we go to high-value farmland, and the land to the north is classified as high-value farmland. That is what is on file, right? So it's binding on us. Right? It's binding on us.
To be clear, what would happen, the city could bring a proposal to bring in those sub areas. Council could vote on it, council could ratify it. Even if it went towards the to the county and they did it, and they went for it too, the state would say no at this point, and it's because of what happened in in the study that we did. So we did a study to show whether it was going to be cost prohibitive to the threshold of impracticability. So that it's a legal term, but the point is that we, even if the city determined that it would be better to bring those lands at this point, they wouldn't be brought in. Yeah, but then again, if you guys bring in everything from there, from the south, how are we going to get? I mean, Molalla is already a traffic jam to me. I've been living here for 20 years, 25 years. I mean,
Try living here for 50-some years and find out what it's like.
Yeah. So you guys got to put that into consideration where it cannot go, we can't say what paperwork says. We got to do a little bit of common sense, be like, hey, is this going to work? Or is this not going to work?
Can somebody explain these exception land that were conceived back in the 80s when Molalla looked much different, and now it's set in stone that that's where you have to go when things have evolved? I mean, in the 80s, we're talking 40 years ago. Molalla is different than 40 years ago. What is these exception land? Why are they so set in stone and are not considered?
Well, yeah. Property owners could ask property owners in the exception land could ask to have their land not be exception land, but then it would be required to be farmland. And right, so if you're again, but it's the fact that property owners have requested with the county that they be given an exclusion to the exclusive farm use, right? So
I'm FRR.
Right.
Rural, and I retired, but I still do some farming.
Right.
I had a pretty productive, only on 5 acres, business, agricultural business.
Right, and that zone is defined, the question for exception land is any county zoning that is not exclusive farm use that has residential as its primary use. And that's what those R's, right? I mean, it's defined with the county as a primarily residential use of the land. So
Farm, forest, rural,
residential, right? So again, if the county has said this is not exclusive farm, this is being used as a residential use, then when you expand for more residential use, you have to use that land first, because it's already been identified and zoned for residential.
I was inspected by the Department of Agriculture 3 or 4 times a year for my business. I mean, I was definitely agriculture.
Right, but the zoning is for residential. And again, I think at that high level, we can kind of understand that if land has been set aside or been rezoned by the county to say, hey, this is no longer primarily farmland, it's primarily residential neighborhoods on larger lots with some farming uses. Then when the city expands for residential, then that's where they have to look according to the law. We're not allowed to not consider it unless we can prove it's prohibitively expensive, meaning it's like 3-4 times more expensive. Then we can exclude it. And when we did the cost estimates, we got the grant, we did the cost estimates, we put a hold on this project for a year to do this. The cost estimates came out that they're pretty much comparable to go in any direction. So by that, we then are not allowed to, that one caveat to how to get out of the exception land is not available to us under the law.
Part two is that when you buy a house, it says nowhere on a deed that it's exception land. I found that after the fact.
Right, because
So,
the exception land itself is not a sticker or tag, it is a definition for this process that says any county zoning that is defined in its definition as primarily residential. And I mean, I think when you look at the map of all the stuff down on the south, you see that there's a lot of homes, there's a lot of parcelized homes there on smaller lots. So I think that's.
My neighbor to the right, my neighbor to the left, my neighbor to the north.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Some sort of the other.
It just happens.
I had those.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. I'll stick around for a few more comments or questions. Again, these comments, please take the time to fill out the comment card. That's my documentation that says this is what we heard from the public. I love the conversation. This is all going to go into my interpretation and my notes. But if you fill out the comment card, if you have your neighbors fill out online or you fill out online, that becomes part of the record of what we heard from the public. And again, it doesn't get me out of the legal framework, but it does allow me where there is wiggle room and where there are some determinations of these location factors. Having public comment of local knowledge is very key to us making the right decision here. It's not going to get us out of going south versus north. That we needed the cost estimates and they just didn't come back for that.
But with all the infrastructure for a new road to get to Highway 213 part of that? 'Cause
Yes.
So there's a brand new road that we go in for that.
No, I'm saying the cost of it, right? When we looked at the cost estimates, all of the, yes, it made it almost still the same, if not some portions of it even cheaper than going north.
Can I ask my question, please?
Yes,
I've been
please.
waiting.
Sorry, I thought you were waving it to
No.
turn it in. I was like, okay, it's fine. But,
First, on
please.
your final UGB studies area, you have 211 marked as 213. Can you get that corrected so it's correct
Okay.
on your map? Number two, the letter said this meeting went until 9 o'clock, so that's why I was patiently waiting for other people to ask, so I'm sorry if it's over at 8. Number three.
We're still going.
Okay. Number 3.
Yes.
Having lived next to areas 7, 8, 9, 6, 5, all those areas, we have a farm, 200 acres that we work. Was there any geology studies done to see how far out you can go? Because that is a fault line. Having lived through an earthquake and a landslide through there, has that been taken into consideration?
I don't have the list of the data, but we did over the last process, our GIS, which is our Geographical Information Systems, they pulled all the available data from, all the hazards, all the floodplains, all the available data for any state or federal agency that has anything marked. We pulled all of that, and that's what went into building what we called our constraints layer, which is like land that is not appropriate for development and should be considered constrained because of hazards, wetlands, and again, all of those categories. So there's a whole laundry list of all the data sources that we use. So I can't speak to exactly which one went to fault lines, but again, that is part of the process, and we have to document all of that to the state.
There's also natural springs on that farm along that hillside, and so I'm worried about some of the development there disturbing all of that, which feeds some of our ponds for our fish.
Right, and again, after this process, there are 2 grants that we're looking into right now for the city, which is to update their local wetlands inventory. The county did some, and they didn't get all the way to Molalla. So we had to go with the state data, so we didn't have any more recent. So one of them would be to do a local wetlands inventory, which is actually looking at the parcel level and inventorying where there exist those springs and those wetlands. to make sure before any development is allowed that those are inventoried and marked and protected. The second thing is the concept plan, which again is sort of a high level, but it's talking about like, well, okay, we're bringing in this land. Where should we focus any density? Where should we prioritize? How should we phase development? Are there roads? Are there other things that need to go in? Are there schools? Are there stuff that needs to go in? So again, concept planning and then the actual TSP update. So again, there's lots of updates that would need to come out based on this. This is this land supply, and then the decision and all the traffic analysis and all the stuff about what actually happens does come later, and is required, right? It is required. It's not like we just say, okay, this is our new UGB, have at it, right? So there's a lot of planning, and I'm trying to help the city apply for some grants so that money comes from grant funding, so that analysis is all done and documented before any future decisions are made.
When do you foresee the transportation public input to happen?
The grant cycle right now is petitioning ODOT for a grant to do the concept plan. Those are due in August. Decisions come out in the fall, usually in October, and then projects tend to kick off at the first of the year if the grant is approved. There would be there would be a project announcement and say, hey, we're kicking off a concept plan. Often I'll then come, when I do these concept plans, I come out with a map, and usually it's some stickers and markers and saying, okay, this is the land we're looking at. What makes sense? Where's the traffic? Where are the different uses? Let's really dig in and figure out what makes sense. And usually I'll have people break into small groups of like 6 people and say, hey, go draw a plan. Show me what you think this land makes sense for, right? So again, that concept plan process, usually it'll last for about a year and a half. And then at the end of the day, you have sort of a master plan of what's planned, and then you update all of your like capital improvement plans, your transportation systems plan that say, okay, this road that came out of this concept plan is priority number 1, or it's, or you start to figure out what those priorities are and make some concrete decisions over what's going to happen. So yeah, it would be coming in over the next year or so.
I have a quick question. 2 or 3 people here probably agree with me, maybe not. If we can figure out all this development and expansion and all this, is there any way the city of Molalla can put some leverage against ODOT to pave the main drive through Molalla? I mean, it's ridiculous. I know it's not directed towards you, but I mean, when does that ever get paved? They're forcing this town to add more, but we can't pave a road? The one right behind us, Main Street.
Are you looking at me to respond? Yeah, I mean, we just frankly don't have jurisdiction over the ODOT highway, but all of the new pavement that is on there has come from the city, because ultimately it does serve the folks who live here, and it's gotten in such a state that it's agreedly ridiculous. I know the mayor has been putting a lot of pressure on ODOT. That's more at the political level above our heads, but if we're being real honest, it seems like the more pressure we put, the less movement we get. But that hasn't stopped anyone. I want to be clear. And so, yes, there is an effort to do that, and I hate to sit in here and throw my hands up. I don't really want to do that. So what we have been doing is where we've seen opportunities to partner with private entities and get some asphalt down on the road for a reasonable cost, because when you start working on the state highway, everything also shoots up in cost for some reason. So we have been able to accomplish some of that internally, but with the taxpayers' money from this community as opposed to the giant pot that ODOT gets. And I don't think anyone is very satisfied with that. And I know that our elected officials have definitely been pushing on that with whatever they can do, which it's not a lot other than saying, hey, we need some help here.
Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I've lived in this town, my wife and I, all of our lives. We're 1845 for my family. Part of this town sits on my family's original donation land claim, and that doesn't make me any better or any worse than anybody else, so I don't mean it that way. But from a safety standpoint, quite honestly, I think you tell ODOT, I mean, I'm just guessing, if you don't fix the road, somebody gets hurt. I mean, somebody could step off the sidewalk and get hurt. you're the one that's gonna be sued, not us, because otherwise it's a city liability. You know that, you know, so. I rest my case, but I just thought I'd bring that up.
And I promise you, no one here disagrees with you. And well, I mean, I can't speak for the folks in the audience, but no one on this staff disagrees with you at all. And I can assure you we're doing what we can, which isn't much.
Even the
admittedly.
honorary staff agrees with you.
No, I understand that. I understand.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
pointing it directly at any
I know.
one person. I
Right.
just, somebody, we gotta be able to do something.
Yeah, I
That's
think
crazy.
you make a good point about leveraging. You know, again, I'm not gonna stand here and make any promises to anybody, but again, as these things get planned, as you get a concept plan, as stuff gets, you know, it does nothing but put more pressure, right, on them to do something. So again, it's, I think it's important, it's heard, and it's definitely part of what we're required to consider as we do the concept planning. But I do know that your city's been working very hard for you on that, and I wish I had an answer.
You said a couple times about you have to get this into the state. What happens if you don't get it into the state?
That's a good question. So again, as I said, in terms of talking about what's required and not required, we'd have to see what the state did, I guess. Because again, it's Oregon law that cities over 10,000 have to have an H&A. Once the H&A is there, you have to deal with the findings of it. And the findings were that there was a shortfall of land for housing. If you don't expand, you know, it becomes a litigation, right?
Yeah, and I'll add a little bit to that. You know, we asked that question on behalf of your council. They wanted to know the same thing because, as you could see, there was a lot of efforts made to try and steer this in the direction that folks wanted it to go, and frankly, that made more sense, like the gentleman stood back there and said a little bit ago. And so we did obtain grant funding to go up there and study those areas to try and make a case for that. And one of our questions was, what if we just don't adopt one? What then? And basically the response that we got back was, well, something bad. And so the truth of the matter is when we've looked at it, and Violet's a recovering lawyer, so am I, so we have a kind of a special lens to be able to look at these things through, and we don't necessarily see where the teeth are outside of litigation. But we think that it would be a losing posture to pursue that because there are laws on the books that require us to have that, that have kind of withstood the test of time a little bit. So obviously our first concern is always about being, you know, very conscientious shepherds of other people's money. It's important to us we don't forget that when we're out here doing these studies and doing these things, that it's your guys' money that's being used. And we want to make sure that it's being used appropriately. So what we've discovered is that since it's on the books, we know that they do have some sort of recourse. There's also a new rule that came out, and there's this office called HAPO. And they will come out and they will take over your planning department. And they will do all the things that the state wants to do, and we won't even have those opportunities for pushback and wiggle room the way we do now. That's part of the new bill that came out. We actually don't know exactly what it looks like when HAPO takes over a planning department in full transparency because it hasn't been done and it's a new law, but we do know that the state will come in and start doing your long-range planning for you. And so we don't think that that's a very desirable outcome too, because we did explore those options and that's kind of where we settled on them, just to give you the analysis that went into it.
It's not clear how they make council vote in favor of the work that they do in that case either, so.
Yeah, it was yeah.
Well, the state doesn't do a very good job no matter what they do, so.
I think we have a question in the back.
Yeah, so where is this timeline for the end of the year? Is that a city timeline, or is that dictated by DLCD or the state somehow? Because I didn't see that from DLCD or the state or anywhere. It looked to be a city timeline.
So it's both. So what happened is that with the sequential UGB process, that makes us put dates on there, and then we've been able to adjust from that because of things like going out and doing that deeper analysis on those properties to the north that took up, you know, several months of time.
Because I went through this stuff and I didn't see a requirement
Yeah.
from DLCD to finish by the end of the year. I think, I mean, the
I gotta
goal
finish
is
my
to do
thought
the
if you want the
process.
answer.
But like, say we did another housing needs analysis, which is now like a housing, it's a different name
Capacity
now. but-
analysis, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that would cost staff time and money, probably, at least $15,000, right? Plus staff
About
time.
$125,000
$125 or 100, even if it was $125,000, we're looking at potentially millions and millions of dollars of public infrastructure costs. I mean, even like, so there was the comment that we don't build the stuff out. We have built stuff out, and I can find proof because it's in public record. But also, it wasn't addressed that we would need the water storage, because that is true. And so, I mean, we're looking at millions of dollars of public infrastructure costs when we could, I mean, the city council has chosen not to take that route as at this moment, but we could redo the analysis, and yeah, it's going to take a lot of time, but doing it right is worth it. And the cost would be so much less to the public in that case.
I'm going to answer your first question first, and then I'll go to the last part. So, like I was saying, so we have to adopt, when you do the sequential UGB, you have to put together a timeline and do all those things. Now, we've been allowed to deviate from that in order to take on some of the studies that have been discussed in here that were above and beyond, in order to try and steer this thing in the direction that we were hearing the community speak to us about, to the extent that we have any authority to do that. Now, basically what happens is, if we don't adopt this by December, then we fall under the new, substantially more onerous rules. And so what happens is that I think that there's a very high likelihood that the amount of land that you'd be looking to bring in your UGB, if we put this off past the December deadline and fall under the new rules, not only would it be several $100,000 worth of more studies, and hopefully we could get grants for those, but there's no guarantee to that. But also we would fall under a new set of rules that's been made under the folks who are in charge right now. And so you can imagine what those look like a little bit. And so I'll kind of leave it at that. But
And so, since as I'm the one who said the comment about trying to aim for the end of the year, I was talking about our sequential work plan, and also just that concept that the rules that we started this under and committed to with our sequential work plan when we started, because there are new rules, there's this kind of question of what rules would apply if we're not have something adopted by the end of the year. So it was more of a, it isn't like DLCD said, you're not going to find it anywhere. It's us talking about the work plan that was committed to at the beginning of the process, and this sort of legal no man's land a little bit over the fact that this process is under the old rules and there's these new rules, and we're not really sure exactly how those new rules with the HAPO office and all of that are gonna work. And so in terms of if we want to proceed with what we're doing, that sort of expires at the end of the year.
So to give one tangible example of it, under the new owner rules, so you do a buildable lands inventory that says how much buildable supply for residential do you have in your existing UGB. There's new exceptions for what counts as buildable. You can actually take exception to that. So even under the new owner rules, what may actually happen is, so let's say we do adopt the new PSU estimates and they are lower, but our BLI could be substantially lower, because a lot of stuff that we counted, we wouldn't count this time.
So
because it's not being developed, it's not accessible.
I think people would.
So to kind of clarify and summarize what Mr. Zinder just said, basically we were able to count a lot that was underutilized. So let's say you have a half-acre lot for your single-family residence. We were able to count that as some portion of that as buildable land in the current UGB, which reduces the amount of land that we need to bring in because we've got that buildable land. Under the new rules, that would not be able to be counted as buildable land, which drives up the amount of land that has to come in.
And that's a fair point, but 3,000 less people that you have to plan for is going to be the significant driver of, you know, what could be a lot less land you have to bring in. And I mean, it's not going to match that kind of number in the end. And it's one else. But I miss you, Mac. Hi.
How are you?
We used to do this a lot more.
We did.
Like every month. No, not like this. And I do appreciate staff. Like,
I know. I know.
I'm not trying to like.
We
harp on you.
don't take it personally. We
Okay,
understand.
good. Because I felt really bad during the fires because I'd been mean to
I know.
Gerald
I would have a lot of opinions on the same situation, and I totally understand it and feelings. And yep, we're glad people are here asking at a minimum, but you know, and we will provide you guys all factual information. It's probably, I know that a lot of it's probably not stuff that you're wanting to hear, but we're trying to make sure we're truthful and transparent.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I understand your guys' point, you know. You've invested a lot of work into it, staff. And then our point, you know, some of our point, some people, is that, you know, it's worth the investment of the extra time for us to do it right. And, you know, when a lot of people that are in city administration now hadn't been, you know, 20 years ago. And one of the things that's been an issue for people who are in current city administration is bad decisions that were made before. And there were lots of bad planning decisions that have been made in the past, numerous times in so many different ways. And so, you know, being really careful and not, you know, rushing a process unnecessarily, even if it takes extra time and it's taking years, these are decisions we are going to feel the consequences of for 20, 40 years, you know. And we don't want people to look back and say, oh my gosh, they've just look what they did to the city. And they did it all wrong, you know. And it's like raising kids. You're going to do shit wrong no matter what. But you try to do it with the best intentions and with the best knowledge that you can.
Well, to tell you, some of us have gone through this process before. You know, about 15, 18 years ago, whatever it was. So it's like déjà vu again, you know?
Yeah, and I do appreciate everybody coming out and the thoughtful conversation. I mean, again, sometimes kind of the worst thing for me is to come out and there's just like crickets and people aren't, you know, really, I just applaud you. This has been a really committed community. I think that you guys really care. I think that comes across. And again, you've got staff working really hard for you on all of these. And again, we've explored as much as we kind of felt, and again, it went before City Council, and I think a lot of these, exactly the points you're making, I will say were made and were in the record and were considered. And I think it just really came down to there being no guarantee of future funding and no guarantee of a different outcome. Was sort of where they landed, and so we've had to go forward on that. And I can see both sides of that.
Well, we'll get that opportunity to make those comments.
Yeah. Exactly. So again, I thank you. Fill out the comment card. I've put up the QR code for anybody. But yeah, another comment down here in the front.
Yeah, so I'm a part of that 20-year plan. I'm new, getting my toes dipped into the Molalla community and been involved in a smaller, little bit 3 times the size of Molalla. So I understand it. My question is, as an outsider, I couldn't be any part of the committees because I'm not a resident of the city. In your transportation committees, are you going to open it up to some of the people who are in the outlying areas to allow them to have kind of like in the planning? So I'd like to see that, you know what I mean, or suggest that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just say yes. When we're doing master planning, especially if it includes the UGB, we're going to not only, excuse me, are you welcome to join, but we're going to go out and try and find people from those areas to be on those committees so that we have people speaking from firsthand knowledge.
Right, and I will say we had members from on our TAC. Obviously, we have agency representatives from the state and the county and all of that. On our public advisory committee, you know, we had someone from Habitat for Humanities. We had faith-based groups. We had people from the CPO, from the county who weren't necessarily in the city. So we talked to lots of people, not just who live in current city limits, because obviously an expansion would be to people who are on county land now, right?
Who's your county soils guy?
It's a lady. It's a lady.
Not sure. I don't remember her name.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah.
and there's a position, like I said, of one person on the planning commission that can be from outside the city limits.
Two.
Two. So often, you know, there's openings on the planning commission, so you can watch out for those opportunities and you can still be part of that.
The other thing is if you're not signed up for the newsletter on the Molalla Current, it's one of the main ways that we, it's that and social media, but we put it out, hey, we need to get a group for this TSP, and that's how it wanted. So if you're not signed up on that, it's just electronic, so it's not.
Signed up. Yeah.
Okay, great.
And again, I'm super impressed because I'll tell you, my small town is 1,200 people in rural Louisiana, and I don't think we could get such a robust engagement if I was trying to do an event there. So I just really love how much people here in Molalla care about their community and are come out and willing to sit in the heat and talk about tough things, because I appreciate people standing up and saying a different opinion and being willing to do that. It takes a lot, and I appreciate it.
I want to.
So did they look at the wetlands? I mean, I know it's not official, but there's old wetland maps.
Yeah, so that's what we use every wetland map available to us, plus that hydric soils map to say where are there, maybe given that the wetland map is old, where maybe we anticipate that when we do an inventory we might find wetlands because it's this hydric soil. So we use both of those to kind of look at the different sub areas.
Is there quite a bit in what you guys chose? Because I thought that was quite wet back there.
The park is wet.
If we can go there,
Here. So you'll see, like this is an example. So this is 8. See the blue up there along Molalla Forest Road? That's the documented wetlands. And if you look, the middle map on the side, of the 3 on the side, the middle one, that peach color, that's those hydric soils. So you can see that there's actually no wetlands or hydric soils in 8, which is one of the reasons we prioritized 8.
I would recommend the Corps of Engineers come in because we had a project. It was all ready, wetland, everything's good. Corps of Engineers came in and made that way different. So I would hire those guys to come in before, not the end, but at the beginning.
Yeah.
Because they'll change it.
Yes, they will.
Yeah.
We're going to get your joint permit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, you're absolutely right. We did use the wetlands, and that, we looked at it. So I can show you 8, 9. Again, there's no wetlands, and there's very little. There's a little bit of that hydric soil sort of runs down right under the number 9. You can see that salmon color. There's a little bit there of hydric soils. Maybe that comes back as wetlands in an inventory, but it's not now. But again, and then 8, and then this is 5. So there's like a little bit down there in that corner, but primarily 5 and 8 are pretty absent of any of that kind of wetlands and hydric soil. So it definitely is a consideration.
Is that lower?
Oh yeah, why waste your time?
Everything else be pumped up to the sewer plant or not?
So, go ahead.
Yeah, so that was kind of our assumption going into this Dyer report, was that it would. Our engineer of record went through the rise over run, and a sewer pipe can go down Molalla Forest Road. So if it went down on it would have had to jump the creek. It can go down Molalla Forest Road the whole way with no need for pump. So that made a big difference in the cost.
You go towards Silverton, leaving the outside, whoa, this thing drops.
It drops quick, yeah.
Right.
But it basically follows, Molalla Forest Road basically follows Bear Creek down, and then it crosses and then follows Bear Creek to the plant.
Well, and honestly, that was the premise that we used to get that grant, is because I had been lobbying, mostly I had been lobbying the governor's office to say, hey, this doesn't make sense when we're looking at it. For all the world, it looks like it's going to need a bunch of pump stations. What we discovered was that it would probably need one, and that we'd also need one up there, so my calibrated eye was a little bit off, but that was how we were able to get the funding to even do those studies. Is that was my premise as well, because it was like, how's it not? would
Right.
drop off a cliff.
The sewer, I mean, the
Yeah.
sewer and the roads looked like they were gonna be trickier, and once we mapped it out, it turned out it wasn't. So it allowed us to go into this with a little
Because
more
everything's
assurance.
just north of there, so I think it's very deceiving, because when you look at it, it looks like you're standing lower.
Right.
I guess you have to walk the whole.
Yeah, I think I, kind of failed to take into the fact that, the depths of sewer pipes are pretty deep too, so
Yeah.
there's a lot of that.
Yeah, the one along Bear Creek is really deep.
But they're right along Highway 213 all the way up.
Mhm. Yep, there's one going that way. Yes.
Well, good job.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Good job.
Thanks, all.
And thank you for sticking around.
That's what they signed up for, huh?
Yeah.
It's the Lion's Den.
Yeah, right.
Have a good evening, you guys. Thank you.
That's it. 2 hours was a little too short. 3 hours is a little.